Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world of cold stone and hushed footsteps, a world where silence wasn't just polite, it was sacred. Imagine the air heavy with the scent of beeswax candles, the faint glimmer of starlight slipping through narrow windows, and the quiet hum of your own heartbeat echoing louder than any bell. That's right, you're about to wander through medieval monasteries, places where noise wasn't merely inconvenient, it was a spiritual enemy. And trust me, you probably won't survive this one if you're the kind of person who chews popcorn during a movie. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your stroll along a gravel path under a navy blue sky. The moon peeks through a mess of clouds, throwing silver streaks on the grass as you approach an immense wall of gray stone. It rises like a fortress because, honestly, that's what it is. These monasteries weren't just holy hangouts, they were medieval strongholds against chaos, temptation, and, most importantly, sound. The great wooden gate groans as it opens, and you step inside. The first thing you notice isn't what you hear, it's what you don't. No carts creaking, no merchants haggling, no blacksmith hammering in some distant lane. Just nothing. Except maybe the faint flutter of a bat overhead. Your boots crunch softly on cobblestones, and that sound alone feels scandalous, like you've just screamed in a library. Back then, silence wasn't just for peace of mind, it was a ladder to heaven. Monks believed that every whisper, every mutter could yank your attention away from God. And distraction was dangerous because it opened the door for sin to slip in. Think of your brain as an old castle with a rickety drawbridge. Sound was the enemy storming the moat. If the monks didn't keep things absolutely silent, well, next stop, eternal damnation. No pressure, right? You shuffle under a stone arch into the cloister, a square courtyard hugged by long corridors. Columns stand like frozen soldiers in neat rows, their bases worn smooth by centuries of sandals. The grass in the middle glows pale in the moonlight, but what grabs you is how still everything feels. You almost expect time to stop ticking just out of respect. And yet, silence here didn't come easy. Picture the scene in daylight, bells clanging 7 times a day, chanting voices bouncing off cold stone walls, wooden doors creaking like old bones. Even sandals whispering across flagstones can feel like thunder when your ears are starved for noise. Monks weren't just fighting the outer world, they were battling the acoustics of their own sacred spaces. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you: Benedictine rule, the famous monastic guideline written in the 6th century, flat out told monks to keep speech short and simple. No idle chit-chat, no gossip. And by the Middle Ages, that rule hardened into what you'd call an iron curtain of hush. Meals? Silent. Work? Silent. Even prayer had its decibel limits. Historians still argue whether this extreme quiet was purely about discipline or if there was a secret competitive streak, like, my abbey's quieter than yours, deal with it. Now, here's a quirk: some monasteries actually train novices by making them carry pebbles in their mouths. Why? So they'd learn not to speak. Imagine walking around for weeks with gravel teeth. Try ordering lunch like that. You'd probably give up halfway and become the first medieval minimalist. You continue walking, the corridor narrowing as you pass oil lamps flickering in iron brackets. Their flames barely hiss, a sound so soft it feels almost intimate. Down a passage, you glimpse the refectory, its long wooden tables lined like soldiers in formation. During meals, a single monk read scripture aloud, but everyone else? Silent as statues. If someone dropped a spoon, they might as well have detonated a cannon. But here's the problem: these monasteries weren't built for whispering modern acoustics. They were carved from stone, the kind of material that doesn't just bounce sound, it sends it on a victory lap around the room. One cough could echo like a sermon. That echo wasn't just annoying, it was spiritually risky. You'd be kneeling, trying to commune with the divine, and suddenly Brother Greg sneezes. You don't just hear it, you feel it, like the walls are laughing. And that brings us to the monks' paranoia about sound. Some believed noise was more than a nuisance, it was an actual weapon of the devil. Yep, according to a few wild sermons, every clang, every babble was a temptation grenade lobbed into your soul. Historians still debate how seriously this was taken, but let's just say you wouldn't want to test the theory by humming during Vespers. You push open a smaller door and step into the dormitory, a long hall lined with plain wooden beds. No curtains. No cushions. Just stark simplicity. Imagine trying to sleep here with someone snoring 3 beds away. There's no white noise app, no earplugs. All you have is your pillow and a prayer. That's when you start to see why monks became obsessed with creating the first noise-canceling spaces. They weren't just chasing peace, they were waging war against chaos, one padded wall at a time. And trust me, they got creative. But that's for later. For now, feel the weight of this vow of silence. Not just your lips locked, but your whole life lived in a kind of sensory stillness. You don't shout across the garden. You don't hum while you sweep. You don't even mutter oops if you spill ink in the scriptorium. One slip, and the abbot might glare at you like you've just committed a mortal sin. Speaking of which, monks had entire systems for punishing chatterers. Some had to lie prostrate in the cloister during meals. Others were forced to eat alone like the medieval equivalent of the quiet kid table. Sounds harsh? Well, when your whole spiritual reputation depends on decibel levels, you take this stuff seriously. You step back into the moonlight, crossing the cloister garden. The night air is crisp, and the only sound is the gentle splash of water from a stone fountain in the center. Funny thing, those fountains weren't just for looks. They acted as the OG white noise machines. The trickle masked stray sounds, keeping the sacred hush intact. Honestly, monks were doing acoustic engineering before anyone even coined the term. But don't get too cozy. That perfect quiet? It won't last. You're about to find out just how noisy the Middle Ages could get, and why these silent warriors had to fight harder than you think to keep their world from falling into chaos. You leave the cloister garden behind and step deeper into the monastery's heart, where silence feels like a living thing, thick, almost tangible. Your sandals whisper against the flagstones, and every time you exhale, you wonder if someone in the shadows is counting your breaths. That's the kind of pressure these monks lived with, a constant awareness that sound wasn't just sound. It was a moral hazard. By day, these stone halls would hum with whispers so faint they might as well be ghosts brushing past your ear. You wouldn't hear shouting or laughter, forget about that, but you'd catch the soft rustle of robes, the scratch of quills, the occasional sigh that escapes when someone's hand cramps from writing amen for the 1000th time. And even that was risky business. Why such an obsession? Because the medieval mind linked sound and sin like peanut butter and jelly, except less delicious and way more eternal. Noise wasn't neutral, it carried spiritual weight. A sudden laugh? Pride. A heated debate? Wrath. Too much chatter? Idleness. In an age when every twitch of the soul was audited by heaven, sound could get you into cosmic trouble. Picture this: you're a 12th century novice, fresh-faced and eager, trying to follow the rule of Saint Benedict. Day 1, the abbot sits you down and says, "My son, guard your tongue." Sounds simple, right? But it wasn't just about gossip, it was about everything. Silence meant purity, a clean slate where God could scribble his notes without background noise. And the punishment for slipping up wasn't light. Some rules required you to prostrate yourself in the refectory while everyone else ate, a living, breathing cautionary tale. Imagine being the medieval version of the guy who talks during a movie, except instead of dirty looks, you're lying face down on cold stone while people chew bread in judgment. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you: the Cistercians, a hardcore monastic order, went so far as to invent a silent sign language. Why? Because even necessary communication had to be soundless. Need salt at dinner? 2 fingers on the table. Want bread? Make a slicing motion with your hand. It turned mealtime into a game of charades with eternal salvation on the line. Historians still argue whether this rule made life more efficient or just gave monks killer miming skills. And then there's the quirky tidbit: some abbeys had what they called the murmuratorium, a tiny chamber where monks could go to speak in private, like a medieval phone booth. Need to confess that Brother Matthew keeps stealing your turn at the washing fountain? Into the murmuratorium you go. It's both hilarious and kind of genius. Imagine installing a whisper room at your local coffee shop. The introverts would riot for joy. But let's talk about the warnings, the whispered ones that slithered through these stone halls like smoke. Picture an older monk leaning toward a trembling novice during evening prayer and murmuring, "Noise lets the devil in." Dramatic, sure, but many believed it. Preachers thundered from pulpits that Satan adored chaos. The louder the world got, the easier it was for demons to dance in the gaps. So if you clanged a pot too hard or dropped a psalter during Mass, you weren't just clumsy, you were practically opening a spiritual wormhole. Step into the chapter house with me for a second. It's a circular chamber where decisions were made, punishments doled out, and the community gathered in eerie quiet. Imagine 30 men sitting in a stone circle, eyes cast down, breathing synchronized like monks in a Gregorian choir, but no sound. When someone did speak, it wasn't chit-chat, it was ritualized, heavy with meaning, like tossing a pebble into a still pond and watching the ripples race for miles. Every syllable mattered. And you? You'd probably burst out laughing just to relieve the pressure, which is why you'd last about 5 minutes in here. Silence had a practical side too. Think of a world without insulation, without soundproof doors, without the background hum of traffic or appliances. Every sound carried. A dropped ladle in the kitchen might echo across the cloister like a call to arms. And echo wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a spiritual landmine. Monks believed prayer required total focus. A single noise could snap the thread between your soul and God like a freight cord. Some chroniclers even claimed that noisy monasteries produced weaker prayers, as if heaven was grading their acoustics. But here's the big question scholars still bicker about: was this obsession really about holiness, or was it about control? Silence, after all, isn't just absence of noise, it's power. When you can't speak freely, you can't challenge authority, can't stir up rebellion, can't even crack a joke without risking penance. Maybe the quiet kept more than just demons out. Maybe it kept thoughts locked in neat, obedient rows. Historians still argue whether monastic silence was spiritual armor or social straitjacket, and honestly, both sound about right. As you wander past a small wooden door, you catch the scent of parchment and ink. Behind it lies the scriptorium, where scribes bend like question marks over pages of Latin text. The scratching of quills would sound like a rainstorm in this world of hush. And here's a quirky image for you. Some scribes actually stuck goose feathers in their ears to muffle distractions, an early DIY earplug. Picture a row of monks with feathers sprouting from their heads like solemn, scholarly birds. Fashion Week, 1150 edition. And yet, despite all this effort, noise always found a way to sneak in. Wind howled through arrow slits. Dogs barked in the courtyard. A pot clanged in the kitchen, and suddenly, you've got half the abbey glaring at the cook like he just summoned Beelzebub. The tension must have been unreal, like living in an open-plan office where God is your boss, and he hates small talk. You can almost feel the pressure in your own chest now. Every breath sounds criminal. You glance at the fountain in the cloister, and suddenly it makes sense. That gentle splash wasn't decorative, it was a tactical move. A primitive white noise machine to soothe nerves, to cover the unholy thud of a dropped sandal. These monks weren't just fanatics, they were innovators, hacking the physics of sound centuries before Bose thought of headphones. But hold that thought, we're just getting started. Because if you think this hush was perfect and serene, you're in for a surprise. The reality? Medieval monasteries were echo chambers in the literal sense. Stone walls don't absorb, they shout. And that echo? It became the monk's worst nightmare. You step back into the cloister just as dawn begins to spill across the horizon like diluted gold. The world outside the walls is waking up, roosters crow, carts rumble, dogs bark at shadows, but inside this monastery, silence still reigns like a jealous monarch. Or at least, it's supposed to. Because here's the dirty little secret of medieval monastic life, silence is fragile. One wrong sound, and the whole illusion shatters like glass. And if you think that's poetic exaggeration, wait until you hear what these echoing halls could do. Walk with me down this long stone corridor, its ceiling arched like a frozen wave overhead. Every surface is rock, floor, walls, vaults. Gorgeous? Sure. Acoustic nightmare? Absolutely. Drops so much as a wooden spoon, and the sound doesn't just fall, it gallops. It bounces off the walls like a loose horse in a marble stable. That clang would roll through passageways, bounce around the cloister, and probably interrupt Brother Thomas halfway through whispering the Psalms. You stop, clap your hands gently, and it's like a cannon went off. The echo takes its time dying, fading into a soft murmur that seems to wander the halls long after you've fallen still. That's the curse of stone, it keeps sound alive longer than anyone wants. And this? This was a major problem. Because monasteries weren't empty shells, they were busy places. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men moving, eating, chanting, working. And the architecture, the very bones of these buildings, turned every cough, every sigh into an uninvited guest at prayer. Here's your mainstream historical fact for today: Romanesque architecture, which dominated the early Middle Ages, loved thick stone walls and high barrel vaults. Gorgeous to look at, but from an acoustic perspective? It was like turning your church into a megaphone. Sound traveled fast and lingered, which meant the more people chanted, the messier it got. Gregorian chant, the pride of monastic life, could melt into a sonic soup if the space wasn't tuned right. Historians still argue whether this chaos influenced the slow, drawn-out style of the chants themselves. Did monks sing those notes so long because they loved it, or because any faster and it would sound like a riot in a cave? Now for a quirky tidbit that'll stick in your brain: some monks believed echoes were the voices of spirits. Imagine kneeling in a dim chapel, murmuring Kyrie eleison, and then hearing your own voice bounce back like some phantom mocking your devotion. Creepy, right? A few chroniclers even warned novices never to speak against the stones, as if walls were tattling to heaven. Whether they meant that literally or figuratively, who knows, but if you've ever yelled in a canyon, you know how alive an echo can feel. You turn into the scriptorium, and wow, talk about tension. Rows of desks, stacks of parchment, the air thick with ink fumes. Quills scratch like tiny swords on vellum, but the real battle? Noise. One slip of the knife trimming a page, and the sound would skitter down the hall like a mouse on speed. The poor guy would freeze mid-motion, praying no one heard. Spoiler alert, everyone did. Monks tried to cope with the echo problem using some pretty desperate hacks. They hung heavy curtains in doorways, draped tapestries on walls, even stacked bundles of hay in storage rooms to dampen sound. Historians still argue how common these tricks were. Were they functional fixes or just decorative luxuries? Either way, imagine a room lined with wool and reeds, like a medieval attempt at a recording studio. Somewhere out there, a 12th century monk basically invented the home sound booth before Spotify was even a twinkle in the universe. And yet, despite all that effort, the echo problem persisted. Why? Because echo doesn't play fair. You think you've tamed it, and then Brother Andrew sneezes, and suddenly it sounds like Zeus hurling thunderbolts in the chapel. Silence isn't just about quiet mouths, it's about architecture, physics, the way air vibrates in a space carved by masons who cared more about awe than acoustics. And if you think that tension didn't eat at them, think again. You can almost picture the scene, the abbot pacing the chapter house, muttering under his breath, ironically, about the latest sonic scandal. Who dropped the bucket during matins? He growls. Who scraped their stool on the stone floor during grace? Every sound became a crime scene, every echo a suspect. And because punishment for noise could be humiliating, the pressure must have been intense. Imagine being terrified of sneezing in church because you might end up fasting alone in the refectory as penance. Honestly, allergy season in a monastery? Pure nightmare fuel. But here's the fun question: why didn't they just build smaller, cozier spaces? Easy answer: they wanted grandeur. Big churches impressed patrons, symbolized power, and looked fabulous in illuminated manuscripts. The downside? Those majestic naves were echo factories. So the monks were stuck between their craving for silence and their addiction to monumental architecture. Historians still argue which came first, the obsession with quiet or the struggle to contain their own acoustic mess. Now, before you sigh and think, well, at least they had it serene most of the time, let me ruin that fantasy. Even without humans, monasteries made their own noises. Wind howled through arrow slits like some unholy flute. Rafters creaked. Water dripped into stone basins with a maddening plink-plink. Add to that the sound of bells, those massive bronze beasts tolling 7 times a day, and tell me, where exactly was this perfect hush they bragged about? Spoiler, it didn't exist. Yet the dream persisted. Silence wasn't just practical, it was mystical. They saw it as a ladder to heaven, the ultimate proof of spiritual discipline. That's why they kept fighting, kept tinkering, kept dreaming up new ways to beat the echo. And eventually, this obsession would lead to something extraordinary, the first real attempts at sound control. But we're not there yet. First, you need to feel the weight of this struggle, the way these echoing halls turn daily life into a gauntlet of unwanted sound. So, take one more slow walk down that corridor. Imagine the hum of voices from the chapter house leaking through the stones, swelling, then fading into eerie quiet. Picture the scriptorium buzzing with unspoken tension. Feel the oppressive stillness pressing down, broken only by the flutter of a bird trapped under the roof beams, a bird whose frantic wings sound, in this world, like a drumline. That's the monastery for you, a place where the fight for silence was never won, only managed, one muffled echo at a time. And trust me, this battle's about to get weirder. Because next, we're diving into how those bells, the so-called keepers of order, turned into the very villains of the monk's sonic saga. The first rays of daylight thread their way through narrow stained glass windows, painting the stone floor with fractured colors, reds like wine, blues like deep rivers, and golds that shimmer like a saint's halo. The monastery is stirring, and so are you. But don't expect a gentle morning hum like your cozy kitchen with a coffee pot gurgling. No, friend. Here, the day begins with a sound so mighty it makes every vowel of silence feel like a cosmic joke. Gong. It starts as a shiver in your bones before you even recognize it as noise. Then another strike follows, gong, rolling through the corridors like distant thunder, rattling in your teeth. The bell is awake, and so is everyone else. That's the paradox of monastic life. Silence ruled the soul, but bells ruled everything else. The very things meant to keep order, those bronze giants swinging high in the tower, were the loudest sounds for miles. Every hour of the day was marked by their voice, whether you liked it or not. And trust me, these weren't polite little tinkles. They were designed to carry across fields, woods, and hills, so that even the shepherd 2 valleys over knew it was time for prayer. Imagine living in a world where your boss not only scheduled your breaks but also announced them by detonating a sonic bomb 7 times a day. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Liturgy of the Hours divided monastic life into a rigid schedule: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each rung of that ladder was nailed into place by bells. Without them, the rhythm of devotion would collapse. But with them? Well, silence never stood a chance. Historians still argue whether monks saw bells as holy instruments or as necessary evils, a kind of spiritual cattle prod that both guided and tormented them. And here's a quirky tidbit you'll love: some monks believed bells could literally scare off demons. That's right, these ringing beasts weren't just clocks, they were weapons. Consecrated with holy water, anointed with oil, and blessed with solemn rites, they were thought to send tremors through the underworld. Imagine Lucifer sitting in his fiery lounge, sipping molten espresso, when suddenly, gong, and his whole sofa shakes. That was the idea, anyway. Bells, the original noise cancelling for hell. But for the poor brothers down below, these holy booms were torture wrapped in bronze. Picture this: you've just managed to sink into that rare thing called monastic sleep, dreaming, perhaps, of grapes ripening in the sun or parchment drying by the fire, when the first bell for matins crashes through your skull at midnight. And no, you don't roll over and hit snooze. You leap from your wooden cot, grab your habit, and stumble toward the chapel in near darkness, hoping you don't stub your toe on Brother Paul's foot. All because a lump of metal in a tower screamed at you. You might think, well, at least they got used to it. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Chroniclers complain about bells almost as much as they complain about bad weather and weak ale. Too loud, too often, too disruptive. And here's the kicker: the louder the bell, the more spiritual clout it gave your abbey. So yes, some monasteries competed for the biggest, baddest bell like medieval muscle cars. Picture 2 abbots glaring at each other across a valley. Nice little tinkle you've got there, brother. Ours can wake the dead. Now, imagine what that did to their dream of perfect hush. Every time peace settled in, gong. Silence shattered like stained glass. And don't even get me started on bell maintenance. Someone had to climb up that tower, oil the ropes, polish the bronze, all without making a racket. Historians still debate whether the men assigned to that job secretly resented every pious note they rang. My guess? They did. A lot. But here's where the irony bites hardest: the bell wasn't just a timekeeper. It was a mood setter. Its sound carved the day into chunks, like a divine knife slicing through bread. And yet, the monks wanted an unbroken hush, a seamless stillness that stretched like a calm lake. That dream? Impossible. Because the bell was both tyrant and servant, a call to holiness that obliterated the very silence holiness required. You wander now toward the refectory as the echoes of morning bells fade into stone. The air smells faintly of bread baking and something vegetal simmering in a pot. Breakfast in a monastery isn't glamorous. Think barley porridge with a side of humility, but the real seasoning is silence. The brothers file in, robes brushing the floor, heads bowed. They sit on long wooden benches, their faces calm, their bodies rigid. No talking. Not a word. But wait, there is a voice. One monk stands at a lectern, reading scripture in a low chant. That's the rule, one speaks for the many. His syllables float over the hall, mingling with the scrape of wooden spoons and the muted clink of pottery. And once again, you hear it, the echo. It takes his voice, stretches it, folds it back on itself until the words are no longer words, just ripples in a stony pond. That's when you realize something profound. Even in silence, there's always sound. A breath. A rustle. A bell's ghost. Here's another fun whisper from history. Some abbeys punished bell ringers for being off-tempo, as if spiritual time could be crooked. Imagine the horror of striking a beat too early and throwing the whole divine schedule into chaos. No pressure, right? Just the salvation of an entire community balanced on your sense of rhythm. And while we're poking fun, think about this. Modern people pay top dollar for mindfulness bells and meditation apps. You'd last about 2 hours in this world before those chimes drove you to invent the iPod 800 years early. Still, for all the noise, for all the clang and clash of iron tongues and bronze throats, the monks didn't abandon their quest. They doubled down. If the bells had to roar, then everything else had to hush even harder. That's when they started inventing quiet corners, padded alcoves, secret cells where sound dared not tread. But that's a tale for later. For now, picture the refectory again, rows of men eating in solemn quiet, their ears tuned to every scrape of a spoon. Outside, the bell tower looms like a sentinel, ready to bark its orders at the next holy hour. And you, my friend? You've barely made it through breakfast without sneezing, a capital offense in this sacred hush. Take a deep breath. Hold it in. Because from here on, the fight for silence is going to get brutal. And trust me, you're about to meet the scriptorium in full chaos mode. You ease open the heavy oak door, and a wave of warm, inky air rolls over you. Welcome to the scriptorium, the nerve center of the medieval monastery, where silence wasn't just golden, it was mandatory. This is where words became immortal, where quills danced across vellum, and where one poorly timed cough could make you more hated than the plague. The room is long and narrow, lined with tall windows that drip pale morning light onto rows of wooden desks. Each desk holds a single sheet of parchment, a pot of ink as dark as midnight, and a quill carved with obsessive care. The monks sit hunched like gargoyles, their hoods pulled low, their eyes locked on the looping letters crawling across the page. Every stroke matters. Every dot. Every curve. One blot, and you're not just ruining a page, you're ruining hours of work, maybe days. No pressure, right? Now lean closer, hear that? The scratch 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 of quills on animal skin. It's the only sound, and even that feels like a whisper. If you've ever typed on a mechanical keyboard in a quiet library, multiply the guilt by 10. That's the vibe. Nobody speaks. Nobody dares. Except, of course, when someone does. You see, for all their vows and rules, monks were human. They sneezed. They coughed. They grunted when their backs ached from bending over a desk for 8 hours straight. And each of those tiny explosions of sound ricocheted off the stone walls like a taunt from the devil himself. Monastic chroniclers tell us stories, half funny, half tragic, of tempers fraying under this fragile hush. One tale whispers of a monk who slammed his quill down after Brother Philip cleared his throat for the 50th time, muttering something about demons of mucus. Was he exaggerating? Probably. Did it get him penance? Definitely. Here's your mainstream historical fact of the day. Most monasteries copy not one book at a time but dozens, sometimes hundreds, over the course of a year. And we're talking Bibles, commentaries, theological texts, massive tomes that took months to complete. The sheer concentration required was brutal. No wonder they treated noise like sin. Historians still argue whether the obsession with silence was born here in the scriptorium more than in the chapel. Think about it, if your livelihood and your soul depended on error-free copying, wouldn't you duct tape every mouth shut if you could? And now for a quirky tidbit, some scribes were so terrified of mistakes that they wrote tiny prayers in the margins, begging God for steady hands. You might see a line like, "Lord, keep my pen from trembling," squeezed between Latin verses. Others went full sass, scrawling, "Cursed be the pest who talks while I work." Imagine a passive-aggressive post-it note, 12th century style. And yes, there's one manuscript where a monk doodled a little grumpy face next to a blot of ink, like the medieval emoji forug. But back to the noise, or rather, the war against it. The scriptorium was supposed to be a sanctuary of soundlessness, but physics didn't get the memo. These rooms were often tucked inside thick stone walls to keep them warm, which only made them echo chambers. Every scratch of a quill, every flip of a page bounced around like a restless ghost. Some monasteries tried laying straw mats on the floor to muffle footsteps. Others hung woolen cloth along the walls. Think of it as medieval soundproofing, crude, but clever. Did it work? Kind of. But even the best hacks couldn't erase human nature. Imagine 30 monks crammed into this room for hours, no talking aloud, all of them locked in a death match with boredom. You'd go a little loopy too. And loopy monks made noise. A sigh here, a yawn there. Maybe a muttered curse when the ink dried too fast. And every slip chipped away at that fragile, coveted hush. One chronicler tells of a novice who accidentally tipped over his inkwell. The black tide oozed across the parchment like a creeping shadow, swallowing letters whole. The boy froze, horror-struck, as the sound of the spill, the soft glug-glug, echoed louder than a drum in that dead quiet room. 30 heads turned in slow motion. No one spoke. They didn't have to. The silence roared louder than words. That kid probably wished the earth would open and swallow him, ink and all. Now, here's something scholars still debate. Did the scriptorium drive this mania for silence, or was it just a symptom? Some argue that the crushing precision required to copy texts made monks fetishize quiet. Others think the obsession came first, and the scriptorium just became its natural throne. Either way, this was where silence was weaponized, polished, and enforced with almost militant zeal. And speaking of enforcement, penalties for chatter could get brutal. Sometimes it was extra fasting. Sometimes solitary confinement in a cold cell with nothing but bread and water. And if you were a repeat offender? Public humiliation. One abbey made talkative monks kneel in the cloister holding a wooden placard that said, in Latin, "I broke the silence." Basically, the original kick me sign, but holier. Now lean against that window ledge for a moment and watch the scene unfold. The monks scratch away, their faces pale in the filtered light. Dust motes dance like tiny planets in a sunbeam. The room smells of ink, vellum, and something faintly sour, maybe unwashed wool. You almost drift into a trance listening to that rhythmic scratching when, crack, someone's quill splits. The sound slices through the hush like a whip. Heads jerk up. Eyes narrow. The culprit flushes crimson and mutters a prayer, as if asking forgiveness for daring to exist audibly. That's the world of the scriptorium, silence so tense it hums, broken by tiny accidents that feel like earthquakes. And yet, through that pressure, beauty bloomed. Illuminated manuscripts gleam with gold leaf and sapphire ink because of this discipline. The hush was harsh, but it gave birth to art that still stuns us today. But don't get too misty-eyed, because while the scriptorium fought its echo demons indoors, outside, the real noise battle was brewing. Birds squawking in the cloister, pilgrims gossiping by the gate, carts rumbling with deliveries. And worse, the animal orchestra that turned some abbeys into something closer to a farmyard than a sanctuary. Get ready, because next, you're about to step outside and meet the goose that almost got excommunicated. Step outside with me. Feel that sudden burst of cold air after the scriptorium's stuffy gloom? The courtyard opens wide like a stone basin, sky spilling blue above it. You take a deep breath, and there it is. Noise. Glorious, chaotic, feather flapping, hoof thudding noise. Welcome to the other side of monastic silence, the part no rulebook could tame. The abbey's cloister garden is supposed to be a sanctuary of contemplation. A square of greenery wrapped in graceful arches, where monks can stroll and meditate on divine mysteries. In paintings, it looks idyllic, serene figures drifting among roses, murmuring psalms like the wind whispers through reeds. But reality? Ha! Reality is Brother Hugo chasing a goose that stole his hood. And yes, let's start with that goose. Her name is lost to history, mercifully, but the legend survives in monastic gossip and marginal doodles. One winter morning, while the bell tolled for prime, this goose waddled into the cloister like she owned the place. Bold as brass, she strutted between the lavender beds, honking like a drunken trumpeter, scattering monks like leaves in a gale. No one dared shout, they'd break the silence rule. So what did they do? They flapped their sleeves and hissed like medieval cat burglars, trying to shoo her without making a sound. The goose, naturally, interpreted this as a game. She grabbed Brother Hugo's hood in her beak and bolted across the arcade. Picture it, a dignified man of God sprinting in circles, arms windmilling, while a bird honks in unholy triumph. Somewhere, surely, Satan laughed. Now, that might sound like an isolated incident. It wasn't. Animals were a constant soundtrack in monastic life. Chickens scratching, pigs grunting, cows lowing from the byre. Abbeys were self-sufficient ecosystems, and ecosystems make noise. You can write silence in a rulebook till your ink runs dry, but try explaining it to a rooster at dawn. Spoiler, he won't care. He's got a divine mission to announce the sunrise at maximum volume. One 14th century complaint from an English priory grumbles about the braying of asses during matins. Imagine chanting psalms in perfect pitch while a donkey adds bass from the stables. Another letter from a French abbey begs a neighboring lord to stop sending his hunting dogs through their grounds because the brethren are sore distracted by their clamor. Translation: the dogs barked like maniacs, and holy patience wore thin. And it wasn't just animals. Pilgrims wandered in, bringing gossip like pollen. Merchants came to trade, calling out their wares under the cloister arches. Even kings sometimes dropped by, and let me tell you, royal entourages were not famous for whispering. Picture a row of monks trying to meditate while squires clatter armor outside and some jester tunes a lute. The irony? Silence, the golden virtue, was hardest to find in the very place that preached it loudest. Here's a detail scholars love. Some monasteries built what were basically complaint walls in their cloisters, sections where monks could write grievances on tablets instead of speaking them aloud. The records read like a passive-aggressive social feed. Brother Matthew neglects to keep the garden in good order. The pigs have broken through the fence again. Whoever leaves goose feathers on the path, may the Lord correct you. Centuries before Facebook, monks had the original wall posts. But let's not romanticize their frustration too much. Silence wasn't just a personal challenge, it was a spiritual war. Every cluck, every creak, every honk was a reminder that the world was noisy and the soul had to fight for stillness. Some abbots leaned into this tension, preaching sermons about inner quiet, about building a cloister in the heart that no goose could breach. Poetic, yes, but when your cassock's torn by poultry, poetry wears thin. And now for the fun twist. Sometimes, these noise villains ended up immortalized in manuscripts. You've seen those bizarre margins in medieval books, right? Rabbits jousting, snails fighting knights, monkeys playing lutes. Scholars debate whether they were moral allegories or just bored monks letting their imaginations off the leash. But listen closely, maybe those doodles were revenge fantasies. Can't scold the goose? Draw her in the Psalms, jousting with Satan. Can't yell at the donkey? Scribble him mooning a saint. A kind of holy graffiti, centuries before Banksy. But don't get too cozy with this image of frustrated monks doodling vengeance. Because next, you're going to see how these tensions didn't always stay cute and funny. Sometimes, noise broke more than silence, it broke tempers, vows, even brotherhood. Monastic history hides a few, let's call them holy meltdowns. Step carefully, because in the next part, you'll watch the vow of silence snap like a dry twig, and when it does, it's louder than a goose in a cathedral. Let's begin with a sound, a single sound that shatters centuries of composure. It starts small, like a pebble cracking thin ice. Imagine a cloister at dawn, mist curling over the arches, incense goes drifting from the chapel, every stone steeped in quiet discipline. Then, thwack, a broom hits a wall. The echo rolls like thunder down the colonnade. That was the sound of Brother Anselm breaking. For 42 years, he kept the rule of silence like a knight keeps his blade. He ate in silence, prayed in silence, mended habits in silence. But today, the piglet got loose again. Not just loose, rampaging. It barreled through the herb garden, overturned the cabbages, and, oh, mercy, tipped over the ink jars in the scriptorium. Crimson trails of spilled pigment ran across the psalms like fresh martyr blood. That was it. The straw that snapped the saint. The chronicles, oh yes, the monks wrote this down, say Anselm flung his broom and bellowed a phrase that made novice ears wilt. In nomine porci, enough. In the name of the pig, enough. It was like watching a glacier collapse. Monks froze mid-chant. One dropped a loaf of bread. Another crossed himself 3 times just in case. Silence, broken by rage, is louder than any battle cry because it carries the weight of everything unsaid. And Anselm wasn't alone. History is littered with these little eruptions. The Cistercian annals grumble about brothers in Burgundy trading punches over who left muddy boots by the lavabo. An Irish rulebook from the 9th century explicitly forbids quarrels of the tongue in cloister, which means, of course, they happened. The fact that the prohibition survives in ink is proof of its necessity. Let me tell you about a particularly juicy one, the Great Cheese Riot of Combermere Abbey, circa 1289. The monks there lived under strict dietary laws, no meat, limited dairy, and fasting days galore. But someone, history never names him, smuggled in a round of forbidden cheese. When the abbot discovered it, he confiscated the contraband and ordered 3 days of penance. That's when tempers curdled. Voices rose in the refectory, accusations flew, and before long, fists did too. Picture it, tonsured men in wool habits grappling on the flagstones while a hunk of cheese rolls like a holy relic across the floor. So much for peace and goodwill among brethren. Why did these meltdowns happen? Because silence is pressure. It builds in the cracks of daily life, in the thousand tiny irritations, cold soup, snoring roommates, ink stains on your sermon draft. In a world where you can't vent with words, frustration turns physical. A harsh look, a slammed door, a hurled broom. The cloister, for all its lofty ideals, was a pressure cooker wrapped in stone. But here's the twist, and the paradox that makes monastic histories so hauntingly human: the ideal of silence didn't break under these outbursts. It bent, it cracked, but it never vanished. After the storm came ritual, confession, forgiveness. The bell rang for none, and the choir chanted as if no brooms had flown. The cloister stitched itself back together like a torn habit mended in candlelight. That rhythm, fall, repent, begin again, was the heartbeat of the monastery. And yet, don't imagine this restored peace as sterile or robotic. There's something almost tender in it. A brother shouts, another bleeds from a bitten lip, and by vespers, they kneel shoulder to shoulder in the same choir stall, voices braided in harmony. Human frailty folded into divine pattern. Brokenness, not erased, but woven back into the fabric of prayer. Still, these incidents left ripples, sometimes literal, in ink. Marginal notes bristle with hints, let there be greater care in the keeping of beasts. Brother Stephen is to refrain from harsh words at table. Behind every bland line lies a tiny drama, anger like a spark in dry hay, doused by ritual before it became a fire. But before you sigh and say, well, that's all very quaint, know this: the vow of silence wasn't just a quaint custom. It was a weapon. A radical, defiant act in an age drunk on words, legal words, royal decrees, marketplace gossip. In that world, silence roared louder than any sermon. And that roar carried far beyond cloister walls, shaping politics, art, even the concept of holiness. So here's where we pivot. We've peeked at the accidents, the absurdities, the holy tantrums. Next, we'll follow silence out of the cloister and into history's bloodstream to see how a habit born in dim arcades bent empires and inspired revolutions of the soul. Prepare yourself, the quiet is about to echo through palaces and battlefields. Step out of the cloister now. Feel the air change. The stone corridors give way to open roads, dust swirling under hooves, banners cracking in the wind. And yet, listen. Even here, beyond the abbey walls, silence follows. Like a shadow. Like a rumor people can't stop repeating. You see, silence had a strange magnetism in the Middle Ages. In a world hammered by the clang of forges, the clatter of markets, and the sermons shouted from pulpits, quiet became an exotic luxury, almost a weapon. To keep silent when everyone else was speaking? That wasn't passivity. It was power. Let me tell you about a king, Louis IX of France. St. Louis, they called him later. This was a man who ruled armies, presided over courts, and collected relics like a magpie of the sacred. Yet chroniclers note this: he feared idle words. Feared them. He would sit at dinner, lips closed tight, while courtiers fidgeted, unsure if silence was a virtue or an accusation. And when he did speak, he did it in measured drops, like oil on water. Those drops, because they were rare, mattered. Every word glittered. That's the paradox of silence. It makes speech precious, like gold coins in a world of copper chatter. Kings learned this from monks. Or rather, they envied it. The cloister made silence holy, the court made it strategic. Ambassadors mastered the art of the long pause. Queens let their silences curdle into threats. A well-placed hush at the negotiating table could sway more than 1,000 syllables. And so the vow of silence, meant for humility, slipped into politics like a dagger under velvet. But silence didn't just seduce the powerful. It gripped the poets too. Dante, yes, that Dante, wrote of the sweet silence of the eternal spheres, spinning beyond mortal noise. Troubadours sighed about lovers so perfect, words would profane them. Even in the rowdy taverns where wine splashed and dice clattered, someone would raise a hand and whisper, "Hush." Because silence meant mystery, and mystery sells better than song. Now picture this ripple stretching farther still, across centuries, into the strange theater of heresy trials. Picture a dark hall in Toulouse, flickering torches casting shadows like skeletal fingers on the walls. A Cathar stands accused. The inquisitor bellows questions. Do you deny the faith of Rome? Do you blaspheme the sacraments? And what does the heretic do? He stays silent. Not from fear, no. From defiance. Silence as rebellion. Silence as the ultimate refusal to play the game. The records fume about this. He answered nothing. To the church, that was worse than a lie. A lie you can burn away. Silence? Silence lingers like smoke in an empty room. And then came the mystics, the wild souls who pushed silence past obedience into ecstasy. Take Marguerite Porete, the Beguine burned for heresy in 1310. Before the flames, they begged her, recant. Speak. She closed her lips and let silence preach instead. It was as if the old monastic ideal had grown fangs, silence no longer a lamb of humility but a lion of defiance, roaring without a sound. Here's the irony that history loves. The louder the world grew, the bells of commerce, the shouting preachers, the hammering of Gutenberg's press, the more people chased quiet. Silence wasn't absence anymore, it was a luxury commodity. Nobles built silent chambers in their estates. Hermits became tourist attractions. Writers inked entire books about the virtue of saying nothing. But don't mistake this for nostalgia. Silence wasn't just retreat. It was revolution, sometimes subtle, sometimes blazing. In the Renaissance, thinkers argued that truth begins not with words but with listening. Later, Protestants would twist the old monastic hush into a new gospel, strip away the babble of priests, hear God in stillness. Even modern revolutions carried its ghost. What is a hunger strike but silence made flesh? And yet, through all this migration, the cloister never lost its grip. Long after abbeys crumbled and monks scattered, the old rule whispered through culture like a draft under a locked door, speak less. Hear more. Hold your tongue, and the world might tilt toward grace. Strange, isn't it? Something born in damp stone corridors ended up shaping diplomacy, poetry, protest. A discipline meant to tame the self ended up bending empires. All because some men, long ago, believed that holiness begins with shutting up. But before we close the gate on this story, let's circle back, one last time, to the quiet itself. To what it felt like. Because that's the hardest thing for us to imagine, buzzing as we are with screens and sirens. The medieval silence wasn't empty. It was full of bells far away, of quills scratching on vellum, of wind hissing through cloister arches. It was a silence thick enough to taste, seasoned with candle smoke and centuries of prayer. In that hush, a monk lifted his heart like a chalice. In that hush, a king measured his words like coins. In that hush, a heretic refused to kneel. And in that hush, history learned a truth it keeps forgetting, that sometimes the most dangerous sound in the world is no sound at all. Picture a manuscript, brown edges curling like autumn leaves, ink faded to the color of old bruises. A monk leans over it, lips moving but soundless. His eyes dart across the page, tracing letters that will never leap into the air as words. Because in the Middle Ages, reading was not the chatter of an inner voice. It was a choreography of silence. Yes, let's linger here for a moment. We moderns think of silence as the absence of noise, but in the medieval mind, it was a tool, a technology of the soul. And nowhere was that tool sharper than in the act of reading. Today, you pick up a book and the voice begins in your head, bright and chatty. You hear the text. But for centuries after Rome's fall, that was unthinkable. Reading was an oral art. To read was to speak, even if softly, even if only to the wind. Augustine himself marveled when he saw Ambrose reading without moving his lips, as if the bishop had hacked into some private mental space no one else knew existed. To read in silence? That was sorcery. Yet monasteries took that sorcery and baptized it. They made it rule. Silent reading became the highest form of discipline. Why? Because words, once chained to the tongue, were freed for the soul. Without the voice, you could plunge deeper, faster, farther into the text. A psalm no longer dripped from the lips like honey, it roared inward, straight into the heart. Silence turned scripture into a lightning rod. But here's the twist, this practice didn't stay put in cloisters. Like ivy, it crept beyond the walls. By the 12th century, scholars in Paris were teaching students to read quietly, hunched over glossed margins like conspirators. Why the shift? Partly efficiency. You can't debate theology in a hall of whispers if every student is muttering Latin under his breath. But partly mystique. Silent reading felt intimate, illicit even. A secret tryst between reader and text. And oh, how it changed the game. Silent reading made the book a private world. A confessional without a priest. A space where dangerous ideas could bloom unseen. Before, a heretical tract shouted its treason aloud. After, it whispered only to the eyes. You could cradle the forbidden without a sound escaping. The church noticed, and fretted, and burned. But by then, the habit had sunk its claws deep. Do you see the irony? The vow of silence, meant to bind monks together, ended up detonating the communal voice of learning. It fractured sound into solitude. It birthed something radical, the private reader. From there, it's a short leap to personal conscience, to skepticism, to revolution inked in margins. You can almost hear the future humming under the hush. Luther, Rousseau, all those modern prophets of the self, they trace back, in a crooked way, to a monk turning pages without a murmur. And still, silence didn't just reshape the mind. It sculpted the body. Look at medieval art, readers slumped over desks, fingers curled like hooks, faces locked in trance. This was no idle pastime. It was labor, silent, but sweaty. Hours of stillness bent spines and bleached faces. Some monks went half blind, pupils ringed with the ghosts of too many psalms. Silence, it turns out, exacted a price. Yet for all its rigor, it glittered with promise. Silent reading let you steal fire from heaven, word by word. It was a rebellion that pretended to be obedience. See, said the abbot, he speaks not a syllable. And yes, his tongue slept. But his thoughts? They rioted, unseen, unchained. Here's the thread I want you to tug. From this moment, this quiet, almost invisible revolution sprang 1,000 shifts. Literature blossomed. Heresy sharpened. Individuality swelled like a tide. And all because men and women learned to shut their mouths while opening their eyes. Strange, isn't it? That the soundless act of reading could echo so loudly through history? But then again, that's the secret of silence, it's never really empty. It hums with the weight of what it hides. So, next time you sink into a book and the world falls away, remember this: you're performing an ancient magic. One that began in cloisters where monks mouthed nothing and everything changed. The libraries came first, cathedrals of parchment rising like stone dreams across Europe. But make no mistake, these were not the bustling reading rooms you know today. No hush rustle of pages in public corners. No casual browsers flipping through for pleasure. No. These places were vaults. Silence wasn't just a courtesy, it was law. A monk's whisper could scrape against eternity. Imagine stepping inside. The chill of limestone coils around you. Candles sputter in iron sconces, throwing halos of amber across chained books. Yes, chained. Each codex shackled to a desk like a dangerous animal. Because in the 12th and 13th centuries, a single book was a kingdom's ransom. Its loss, a sin. Its theft, almost treason. And here's where it turns fascinating: the silence inside those walls wasn't emptiness. It was structured, choreographed. The monastic rules read like blueprints for quiet. Benedict's rule, for instance, carved time into slabs of speech and stillness. Hours for chanting, hours for labor, hours where the tongue must die so the soul might live. Let no one presume to speak, it commands, except to ask for necessity. And necessity, believe me, was a narrow door. But why such tyranny of hush? Partly piety, yes. Silence fenced out sin, so said the abbots. Words were gateways, and gateways invite demons. Better to board them shut. Yet something deeper lurked beneath the rule: control. Because speech is slippery. It breeds dissent, sows whispers, nurtures the heresies that sprout like weeds in shadow. Silence was a leash. A gag. A way to tame thought before it strayed too far from the cloister. And yet, it failed spectacularly. The very quiet meant to crush rebellion became its cradle. Here's the paradox: silence makes space. It hollows a chamber in the mind where forbidden questions bloom like night flowers. Picture a scholar in Paris, lips sealed by custom, but inside, oh, inside, a tempest. Does the Trinity make sense? What if Aristotle was right? What if God is silent, too? These musings would have choked in a babble of voices. In stillness, they take root. This is where the story swerves toward the university, the new creature crawling from the cocoon of cathedral schools in the 12th century. Paris, Bologna, Oxford, hives of intellect, yet humming in a peculiar hush. You might think of students debating, tongues sparring like swords, and yes, that came later. But the foundation was silent reading. The glossed manuscripts, the commentaries stacked like ladders to heaven, none of it worked without the ability to devour text alone, swiftly, without sounding each syllable. And oh, how it quickened the pulse of learning. Silent reading was speed. It let masters gulp Aristotle whole, then stitch his bones into theology before dawn. It birthed the Summas, the monstrous encyclopedias of Thomas Aquinas and his ilk, cathedrals in ink, built stone by silent stone. Without that discipline, the very architecture of scholastic thought collapses. But here's my favorite twist: even as silence ruled the study, sound thundered in the streets. Picture it: Paris at dusk, cobblestones slick with rain, and under the arches, students brawling over logic, chanting rhymes about professors, hurling insults in Latin like daggers. Outside, chaos. Inside the libraries, a deathly calm, broken only by the scratch of quills. Two worlds, one raucous, one reverent, locked in the same city, the same soul. Do you feel it? This tension, between hush and uproar, runs like a live wire through the entire Middle Ages. Monks vowed silence, yet their pens roared. Universities thrived on debate, yet were suckled in quiet. Every word that shook Europe awake, every syllable that cracked the old certainties, was first conceived in a chamber where no sound dared breathe. And so the legacy unfurls. That modern dream of intellectual freedom? Its roots clutch the soil of monastic silence. The very din of the Enlightenment, pamphlets flying, coffeehouses buzzing, was born from the hush of scriptoria. Strange, isn't it, that all our noisy liberties sprouted from men who learned to lock their lips? Perhaps that's the secret truth of silence. It is not emptiness. It is potential, coiled and trembling, like a bowstring drawn to the cheek. In the medieval library, the arrow waited. When it flew, it would pierce the centuries. The arrow flies, but where does it land? Into dissent, into heresy, into the fragile flesh of certainty. For silence, meant to contain thought, instead incubated it. And when it hatched, its wings beat storms across Christendom. Let us linger in the quiet before the thunder. A cloistered night, the bells toll Compline, and voices fall like dying embers. The dormitory breathes in unison, rows of cowled figures cocooned in wool, their tongues nailed by vow. Yet beneath those hoods, thought prowls. Not the tamed sheep of orthodoxy, but wolves with glittering eyes. If God is pure spirit, one monk wonders, why the bread, the wine? Another gnaws on Aristotle's bones. Can motion exist without a mover? They will not speak. Not yet. But questions breathe like rabbits in that padded dark. By daylight, the scriptorium hums, not with sound, but motion. Quills whisper across calfskin. Ink pools like midnight in tiny wells. Here lies a paradox as sharp as any scholastic syllogism. Silence is everywhere, but it crackles, charged, a static that could spark revolt. Because these monks, these keepers of quiet, are also smugglers of dynamite. Every stroke copies not just scripture, but Aristotle, Averroes, Avicenna, pagans and Muslims braided into Christian parchment. Forbidden voices, stitched in Latin, writing beneath the banner of holy work. And when the texts escape the cloister and slink into universities, the real tremor begins. Picture a scholar in Paris, 1240. He bends over a desk, lips locked in the new discipline of silent reading. The words pour in, the soul is mortal. A chill knives his spine. The book says this, not scripture, not Augustine, but Aristotle interpreted by Averroes. He glances around. No one sees. No one hears. In silence, heresy slips its seed into his mind. And like all seeds, it waits for the thaw. When it comes, it's riotous. Oxford students march with cudgels over the right to teach Aristotle. Paris explodes in quadlibetal debates, scholastic showdowns where logic whirls like a tournament lance. And listen, suddenly there is sound, great torrents of it. Voices clash, professors thunder, heretics howl at the stake. But do not forget, every shout was once a whisper in the skull of a man who learned to read in stillness. Heresy itself owes a debt to hush. Think of the Cathars, preaching purity against the rot of Rome. Their leaders spent years in hiding, brooding over scraps of scripture, savoring them in silence like secret fruit. Or the mystics, Eckhart, Hadwige, who slipped the leash of language altogether, chasing God into wordless dark. Silence birthed both rebels and saints. It sharpened their hunger. It made them dangerous. And then there is the subtlest revolt of all, the private self. In the early Middle Ages, you belonged to the chorus, the chanting church, the communal prayer. Your soul was public property. But silent reading carved out a chamber no one else could enter. A man bent over a codex was a man alone with his thoughts, and that was a novelty. An invention. From that privacy sprang everything: doubt, conscience, confession, the eye that would one day bloom in Montaigne's essays and Descartes' meditations. Do you see the arc? Silence begins as a cage, but the bars bend. First, to let in Aristotle. Then to let out Luther. For the Reformation, too, was midwife by mute pages. Gutenberg's press spat pamphlets faster than any pulpit could shout, but the reading was quiet, secret, personal. In German kitchens, men and women hunched over Bibles, lips unmoving, hearts aflame. Rome tried to thunder it down, but what weapon avails against a silence multiplied by millions? And so, the irony deepens. The medieval ideal of controlled hush, meant to anchor the world in order, loosened it instead. From the stillness of cloisters flowed the tempests of modernity. From chained books, the unchaining of thought. From wordless monks, the birth cries of liberty. But let us not romanticize. Silence was not always liberation. It could smother as well as spark. It gagged the peasant who longed to speak against the Lord. It drowned the cry of the heretic before the flames. It pressed on women hardest of all, branding their speech as sin. To listen only to the roar of ideas is to miss the bodies trampled in hush. And yet, I cannot escape the fascination that the quietest rooms of Europe bred its loudest revolutions. That the Reformation's hammer rang first in the inaudible act of a man turning a page, alone, unheard. That our age, so swollen with noise, was suckled at the breast of silence. What, then, is silence? A prison? A womb? Both, and more. It is the pause before the first note, the dark before the spark. The Middle Ages knew this, though they never said it aloud. How could they? Some truths can only be told in whispers, or left unsaid altogether. And so we leave them, the monks in their hush, the scholars in their quiet fever, the mystics staring into God's mute abyss. The storm they birthed is ours to weather. But the silence, their silence, still hums beneath our clamor, like the bass note of history, deep and unending. The ink has dried, but the hush remains. We move now into an age that pretends to crackle with sound, the Renaissance, the printing press, the bustling chatter of markets and courts, but listen closely, and you will hear the old silence curled at its root, shaping even the loudest revolutions. Begin with a workshop in Mainz, about the year 1450. It is not a grand place, timbers low, floors gritty with dust, but here, in the dim glow of tallow candles, Gutenberg's hands perform alchemy. Lead becomes letters, letters become words, words multiply like locusts across the plains of Europe. The press groans, the screw tightens, the inked page kisses the paper. And yet, how does the magic work? Not in thunder, but in quiet. Each printed sheet is a summons to solitude. Each Bible, each pamphlet, is a ticket to the private kingdom of reading. The old world had ears, the new world has eyes. Sermons once thundered in the nave, now Scripture whispers on the page. And it whispers to everyone, merchants, midwives, millers, those whose tongues had never tasted Latin's honey. Luther, in Wittenberg, sees this and smiles a thin, dangerous smile. Let every man read the word for himself. Do you hear the undertow? It sounds like freedom, but it also sounds like fracture. For when men read alone, they do not read alike. Silence breeds opinion. Opinion breathes schism. And so, in the flickering hush of German kitchens, a slow detonation begins. A farmer squints at the gospel by lamplight, lips pressed shut. He sees no warrant for bishops, no tithes, no indulgences. Tomorrow he will march with the peasants, pitchfork in hand. A tailor in Zurich pores over Paul and finds no infant baptism. Soon, he will plunge into the river, reborn in his own eyes as an Anabaptist and hunted in everyone else's. The map of Europe will crack, and out of those fissures will gush blood. But tonight, all is still. The only sound is the scrape of a stool, the slow turning of a page. And art, yes, even art bows to the cult of quiet. Step into a Florentine chapel. The fresco flares with color, Gabriel leans, Mary bends, and yet their mouths do not part. The Annunciation is always silent. The word enters her ear without a sound, as if even God respects the tyranny of hush. Or take Leonardo, his notebooks teem with contraptions, dissections, dreams of flight, yet all are written backward, a secret script for one reader alone. The Renaissance exalts the individual, yes, but it cloaks him, too, in silence. Nor is this silence benign. It coils, it constricts. In Spain, the Inquisition tightens its noose. Heretics are not only burned, they are gagged. Their tongues are pierced with iron spikes so that even the last scream dies unborn. In Rome, the index of forbidden books blooms like a black flower. Galileo will one day murmur, "E per esse move," and even that murmur must be apocryphal, for truth now survives only as a rumor in the hush between heartbeats. And yet, beneath the terror, thought ferments. Copernicus, in his Prussian tower, circles the sun in silence. He dares not shout, he barely dares whisper. He sends his book into the world like a spy in disguise, its preface crawling with lies of mere hypothesis. But the lie is a fuse, and silence is its sheath. When it blows, the heavens themselves will reel. Do you see the pattern? Every age that trumpets its noise, the clang of presses, the roar of disputation, rests on a deeper stratum of quiet. It is in that still soil that the roots of revolution creep. Noise is the flower, silence is the seed. And what of the self, that proud invention of the Renaissance? It fattens on solitude. Montaigne, in his tower, shuts the door, shuts the world, and listens to the whisper of his own mind. Que sais je? What do I know? It is a question born not in the marketplace, but in the cloistered hush of private thought. Descartes, too, wraps himself in silence, as if in wool, until all that remains is a voice, his own, murmuring cogito like a prayer. But hush, do not mistake this for peace. Silence, by now, is double-edged. It shelters, but it also isolates. It makes men free, but it makes them lonely. The Renaissance exalts the human voice, yet buries it deeper and deeper in the labyrinth of the self. Soon, that voice will echo into canons, into philosophies, into screams on the scaffold. For now, we leave them, the printers sweating at their presses, the heretics bending over their contraband texts, the painters glazing mute Madonnas. A world is tilting, and the hinge is soundless. The old silence of the monastery has seeped into the parlor, the study, the skull. And from that inward hush will come an age that calls itself modern, an age drunk on reason, and yet haunted, always haunted, by the quiet from which it sprang. But our story is not done. For if the Renaissance turns silence inward, the Enlightenment will try to banish it altogether, and fail. The next chapter belongs to the philosophers, the salons, the noisy birth of public opinion. But what happens when noise becomes its own tyranny? When men, at last, long again for quiet? We will follow them there. But first, one last look at the presses pounding like blacksmiths, and the books flowing like rivers, and the stillness where each river ends, in the small, unlit room of a solitary reader, hearing nothing but the rustle of a page and the beating of his heart. Now, the world sharpens its teeth. The Enlightenment arrives, and with it comes noise, bright, brilliant, clamorous noise. Paris salons buzz like hives. Coffeehouses brim with chatter, thick as steam. Pamphlets, letters, journals, they swarm across Europe, winged with opinion. This, we are told, is an age of reason. But listen closely, reason has a voice now, and it will not shut up. Imagine a salon on the Rue Saint-Honoré. Curtains drawn, candles sputtering in crystal sconces, the air thick with tobacco and argument. Diderot leans forward, eyes glittering, as Rousseau declaims the corruption of society. A marquise fans herself, the flutter almost keeping time with Voltaire's rapier wit. Laughter ripples, but not too loud, the police have ears everywhere. For the Enlightenment loves light, but it breeds in shadow. These conversations are half performance, half conspiracy, and they know it. Meanwhile, the presses thunder louder than ever. Encyclopedias crash onto the scene, a universe bound in calfskin. Every science, every art, alphabetized and annotated for the common mind. This is noise in its most audacious form, a million facts clamoring for attention, a babble of progress. And yet, what is the paradox? Each reader still reads alone. Amid all this public din, the deepest revolutions are born in private, in the whispering dialogue between mind and page. But let us not gild the myth. For every shaft of light, there is a shadow curling at its edge. This age of open speech carries within it an obsession with control, because words, once loose, are harder to cage than lions. Across the channel, English printers need licenses. Across the continent, censors sniff like bloodhounds. In France, a manuscript may slip from hand to hand, nameless, furtive, as if it were contraband, and it is. A single phrase can damn a man. To write too boldly is to gamble with your neck. Voltaire, that high priest of wit, knows this well. His letters drip irony, a weapon honed for survival. Crush the infamous thing, he whispers of superstition, but softly, softly, for the Bastille yawns for louder men. Rousseau fares no better, adored, denounced, driven into exile, his voice oscillates between trumpet and sob. The Enlightenment loves liberty, but fears its own echo. Speech blooms in salons, but not in the streets, not yet. And while philosophers chatter, monarchs listen, and plot. Frederick, Catherine, Joseph, they sip the honey of ideas but keep the sting for their subjects. Enlightened despotism, they call it, as if tyranny could be perfumed by logic. They will build academies, codify laws, drain swamps of ignorance, yet still, they tighten the leash. A paradox for the ages, kings praising liberty while writing in silence the edicts that will choke it. But beneath their gilded ceilings, a tremor begins. Silence, the old conspirator, slides back into play. Not the silence of monks now, nor the hush of scholars, but a dangerous, seditious hush. In attics and garrets, presses clatter through the night, birthing pamphlets that sting like hornets. They carry rumors, satires, dreams of a new world, a world without kings, without priests, without chains. And when these whispers grow too many, they will swell into a roar that no Bastille can hold. Yet before that roar comes something stranger, a cult of sensibility. Rousseau teaches Europe to listen, not to God, not to kings, but to the murmur of the heart. Tears glisten in drawing rooms. Gentlemen swoon over novels, ladies weep over shepherds who never lived. Music softens its edges, sighs and trembles, paintings trade grandeur for intimacy. It is as if, amid all this rational thunder, the soul craves a softer sound. Silence becomes sentimental. It drapes itself in pastoral green and whispers, feel, feel, feel. But hush, do you hear the drumroll beneath the harpsichord? revolution is tuning its instruments. In Paris, the salons grow restless, the coffeehouses hiss with rumor. Words sharpen to blades. Pamphlets become manifestos. The silence of fear shifts to the silence of plotting. And then, bang! The cannon speaks, and 1,000 voices cheer. The Enlightenment promised light, but it delivers fire. Heads will fall, churches will burn, and the very men who preach reason will drown in the blood of their ideals. But that is later. For now, the salons still glitter, the encyclopedias still glow with optimism, the philosophers still believe that words can mend the world. They do not yet see the abyss yawning at their feet. They cannot imagine that the dream of perfect speech will end, once again, in perfect silence, the silence of the guillotine. When we return, we will walk with them into that silence, the revolution, the terror, the hush that follows every shout. For history, like a pendulum, swings always between noise and nothing. Noise becomes thunder. July 1789, the Bastille groans under a sky heavy with heat and rumor. The streets of Paris swarm, a tide of hunger, rage, and pamphlets. Always pamphlets. They flutter like black birds, carrying slogans sharp as pikes: Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. 3 words, so simple, so terrible, that they will echo across the globe like a cannon shot. The Enlightenment dreamed of reason, but reason does not march with drums. The revolution is born in noise, the clamor of the crowd, the boom of artillery, the hoarse cries of men drunk on hope and blood. In the salons, the chandeliers shiver as whispers curdle to fear. That polite babble of philosophy, once so daring, now trembles before the shout of the streets. For noise, when it grows too loud, is no longer discourse. It is demand. The king falters. Louis XVI, that corpulent question mark of a monarch, pens edicts no one reads. His court mutters behind perfumed fans, but the murmur outside grows monstrous. Versailles is no longer a palace, it is an island ringed by a swelling sea. And seas do what seas do, they break the levees. The Bastille falls with a crash, but listen closer, after the storm, a new sound blooms. Silence, but not peace. The silence of awe, of disbelief, of history slamming its first iron gate. That fortress had been more symbol than stronghold, and its rubble becomes scripture. A whisper moves through France, then Europe: if the Bastille can fall, what else? Thrones begin to creak in distant capitals. But silence does not last long. The revolution is a furnace fed by words. Speeches boil from every rostrum, pamphlets hiss from every press. Clubs rise like mushrooms after rain, the Jacobins, the Cordeliers, each louder, fiercer, shriller than the last. To speak is to live, to hesitate is to perish. Newspapers scream in headlines, squares roar with debate. Even in the countryside, peasants gossip with new fire in their veins. For the first time, the lowly speak of themselves as citizens, not subjects. And yet, paradox, this age that kills kings for silence will soon kill men for words. The revolution devours speech as it once devoured privilege. The guillotine sings its brisk, metallic aria, and its rhythm beats faster with every passing month. The noise of liberty, which shook heaven and earth, turns inward, choking on its own echoes. Picture the convention, a hall thick with sweat, gunpowder, and fear. Robespierre, pale as parchment, rises to speak. His voice is thin, almost meek, but it slices the air like a scalpel. He does not thunder, he insinuates. And that is worse. Each syllable drips virtue, each phrase coils like a noose. When he calls for more blood, the hall erupts, not in laughter now, but in cheers edged with terror. For everyone knows, today you cheer, tomorrow you kneel. Outside, Paris holds its breath. Silence now has a different texture, not the hush of reverence, but the strangled quiet of dread. Doors close, windows darken. Words scuttle underground like rats. For in the year of terror, speech is a blade, and every blade has two edges. Say too little, you die. Say too much, you die. Stay silent, sometimes, that too is fatal. And yet the machinery clanks on. Danton falls. Hébert falls. Camille Desmoulins, who once danced in joy at the Bastille, weeps as he mounts the scaffold. Even speech cannot save him. Especially speech. His final words are drowned by the drum roll. Noise has become ritual, and ritual demands silence at the end. By 1794, the blade tires of biting. Robespierre himself ascends to the scaffold he sanctified. His jaw shattered, he cannot speak. How poetic, how cruel. The voice that drowned France in virtue is mute at last. The crowd howls, but the scream feels hollow, exhausted. And then, at last, it stops. The terror ends not with a bang, but with a silence thick as blood. Yet outside France, the sound rolls on. Across the Atlantic, America hums with its new constitution, proud and imperfect. In Haiti, a roar rises from the sugar fields, a cry for liberty darker and fiercer than Paris ever dreamed. Toussaint Louverture speaks in the cadence of justice, and his words crack chains. Empires tremble. For the revolution's noise is viral, it leaps oceans, storms colonies, and whispers into every ear that has ever been beneath a yoke. But hush, we are not done. For the 19th century is waiting, restless, bristling with steel and smoke. Factories will thunder, trains will shriek, cities will roar like caged beasts. Noise will become the anthem of progress, and silence will shrink to monasteries of the mind. Yet even there, even in the quiet corners, a new rebellion will germinate, a rebellion of sound against sense, of music against the machine. Before that, though, we linger on the guillotine's last echo. Listen. Faint now, almost gone. The revolution promised a chorus of free voices, but it left behind a whisper. Was it worth it? And history, as always, declines to answer. Next, we step into the industrial age, where noise ceases to be metaphor and becomes the pulse of life itself, engines, pistons, telegraphs, the ticking heart of modernity. And in that din, we will hunt for silence, if any remains. Iron wakes. Steam breathes. The 19th century stretches its sinews, and the world begins to throb like a great machine. We have left behind the age of muskets and musket smoke. Now comes the reign of pistons, the hiss of valves, the groan of iron rails stretching across the land like black veins. Noise, real noise, not metaphor, becomes the new monarch. It does not merely dominate cities, it creates them. Where once green fields dozed beneath church bells, now factories rise like soot-black cathedrals. Their hymns are the rhythmic clank of gears, the shriek of belts, the hammer's ceaseless tattoo on steel. Step inside a cotton mill. The air is wool-thick, the walls sweating with grease, and above all, the sound, oh, the sound. It is not a sound, it is a storm. Hundreds of looms, iron-jawed and hungry, snap at threads like metal beasts. Voices vanish in the din, workers speak with their hands, or not at all. Children, tiny, nimble, expendable, scurry beneath the shuttles, their ears already half-deaf before they grow tall enough to see daylight. Outside, the streets hum with wheels and hooves, cries of vendors, clang of horseshoes. The city never sleeps, it snores and growls, its breath thick with coal smoke. For the first time in history, human life runs by the clock, not the sun. Tick, 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 the new tyrant. Factory whistles slice the dawn like a blade, herding men to labor as surely as bells once herded monks to prayer. And trains, oh, trains! What poetry in their thunder, what terror in their haste! They shriek through valleys, breathing fire, their pistons pumping like the heart of some iron dragon. Villagers gape, hats in hand, as rails bite into earth and time collapses like paper. A journey that once swallowed days now vanishes in hours. Progress is speed, and speed is noise. The philosophers of the age write sonnets to industry. Carlyle calls work the grand cure, Marx calls the factory a social engine. Engineers dream in rivets and steel beams. Painters smear smoke across their skies. Even music fattens with noise. Widener builds orchestras like armies, pounding brass into the ears of Europe. Art imitates the factory, louder, grander, mechanized. But hush, what a silence! It flees like a startled deer. In the countryside, the hedgerows quiver to the whistle of trains. In towns, the old hush of cobblestones is smothered under wheels, hooves, boots. Even the home, once a sanctuary, trembles to the beat of progress. Sewing machines chatter, clocks tick like metronomes of mortality. And so, irony blooms. The louder life becomes, the more men yearn for quiet. Silence, once the birthright of every peasant, now becomes a luxury for the rich. They build country estates as fortresses of hush, gardens walled against the clamor of steam. In drawing rooms, heavy curtains and plush carpets muffle the street's growl. Writers, poor, harried souls, flee to the Lake District, to alpine chalets, to any scrap of stillness where the pen may whisper unheard. Yet even in these havens, the industrial pulse follows. Telegraph wires stitch the horizon, buzzing with Morse's staccato code. What hath God wrought? They tap, and the answer comes, a world that will never again be still. For with every cable, every engine, silence recedes like a tide. Consider the new middle-class parlor, a piano trills where once only fire crackled. Consider the rail station, its iron ribs echo with calls, hisses, shouts, the steam whistle's wolfish howl. And consider the great exhibitions, those glittering temples of progress, where engines roar not to work but to dazzle, where noise itself is paraded as spectacle. The future, they proclaim, is loud, bright, fast. But progress has a price. Ears grow weary. Minds quiver under the assault. Doctors coin new terms, neurasthenia, nervous exhaustion, for a malaise that is really the music of modernity, played too loud. Rest cures bloom like exotic flowers, sanitariums, spas, retreats where the anxious elite sip broth in padded silence. Silence is therapy now, bottled and sold. And as the century turns, inventors begin to dream, not only of faster engines, but of softer worlds. Rubber tires to hush the carriage's clatter. Carpets thicker than moss. Double-glazed windows, like glass barricades against the rising tide of sound. Noise, it seems, has created its own shadow, a craving for the hush it murdered. Yet the machine rolls on. Cities sprawl like iron jungles, bristling with chimneys and smokestacks. The rural hush fades to a rumor, a memory murmured in poetry while locomotives howl down the tracks. The 19th century, intoxicated with motion, does not pause to listen. It cannot. For in this new symphony of progress, the conductor is speed, and the score is noise. But wait, listen closely. Beneath the roar of steam, another sound stirs, a hum, faint but insistent. Electricity. The telegraph's pulse will fatten into wires that carry voices, music, the murmur of an entire planet. Soon, silence will not merely be rare, it will be unnatural. The 20th century is crouching at the door, its engines oiled, its circuits humming. It brings with it not only noise, but broadcast noise, voices without faces, music without instruments, sound unmoored from source. And with it, a new question: when sound becomes everywhere, what becomes of silence? That, my friend, is where we go next. The age of telephones, phonographs, and the first electric hiss, a century where sound ceases to be a servant and becomes a sovereign. The 20th century does not tiptoe in. It bursts through the door with a shout, a crackle, a fanfare of brass, and behind it trails a chord, humming faintly. Electricity has come of age, and with it, sound is no longer tethered to the human throat or the vibrating string. Sound has broken its chains. It can now travel, amplify, multiply. Consider the phonograph, Edison's spinning miracle. When it first whirred into parlors, people gasped. The dead speak again, they cried, for the voices of Caruso and Melba rose from the horn like ghosts coaxed from their graves. A century earlier, to hear music, you needed musicians. Now, a turn of the crank, and an orchestra bloomed from a brass flower on your table. It was sorcery, sweet, uncanny, and, some whispered, unholy. For if the voice could be bottled, what of the soul? Soon, the gramophone refines the magic, discs replacing wax cylinders, and the world spins to its new soundtrack. Parlors echo with waltzes, ragtime, Sousa marches. Music leaps borders, leaps oceans. A Viennese waltz hums in a Kansas kitchen. Jazz, born in the smoke and sweat of New Orleans, shimmies into Parisian cafes. Never before has sound traveled so far, so fast, and never before has it intruded so deeply into private life. The home, once an island of relative hush, is now an amphitheater. But the phonograph is only the overture. The real revolution crackles through the ether, radio. At first, it is a whisper, a hobbyist's toy, wires strewn like spiderwebs in attics. Then, in 1920, Pittsburgh speaks. KDKA announces election returns, and suddenly, the air itself becomes an auditorium. Within a decade, radio stations bloom like steel flowers, their masts stabbing the sky. Cities, farms, villages, everywhere the signal seeps. Imagine the marvel: a farmer in Iowa, dirt still under his nails, listening to a symphony from New York, a family huddled around the glowing dial, their faces washed in amber, as a voice, clear, commanding, booms from the void. Presidents campaign through it. Crooners seduce through it. Advertisers colonize it, hawking soap, cigarettes, miracle tonics. The human voice has never wielded such power. It can soothe, stir, deceive. It can sell wars as easily as soap. And what of silence? Poor, frail silence, it retreats further, hunted to the margins. Once, you could step outside and hear the wind combing the trees, a dog barking far off. Now, even the night hums. Radios murmur through open windows. Dance halls spill jazz into the streets. In cities, horns blare, engines growl, trolleys screech on iron rails. Noise becomes democratic, it belongs to everyone, and thus, to no one. Not everyone cheers this conquest. In 1908, a physician named Theodore Lessing pens an essay, Acoustic Life Torment. He rails against the clatter of modernity, the rattling streetcars, the shriek of factory whistles, the infernal barking of dogs. Noise, he writes, is the most relentless of tyrants. A decade later, his lament becomes prophecy. By the 1920s, cities groan under their own decibels. Car horns blast in symphonic chaos. Typewriters clack in every office. Elevators ding. cash registers ring. And above it all, the radio cackles, croons, commands. Psychologists diagnose a new malaise, nervous fatigue, city neurosis. Newspapers print letters from readers begging for quiet zones. In London, an anti-noise league takes shape, its members marching against the din of the age. Pamphlets warn of sound poisoning. Noise is no longer quaint, it is pathogenic. Silence, once so common it went unnoticed, now gleams like a rare gem. Yet the appetite for sound only grows. Jazz bands explode like fireworks across the 20s. The Charleston rattles dance floors from Harlem to Berlin. Microphones, those delicate ears of electricity, make voices intimate, seductive. Singers no longer need lungs of iron, they need whispers of velvet. A crooner like Bing Crosby can melt a million hearts in a single breath, carried on invisible waves into kitchens, bedrooms, lonely rooms lit by a single lamp. By the 30s, radio is a household deity. It speaks the news, croons you to sleep, sells you toothpaste, and, when Orson Welles has his wicked way, convinces you the Martians have landed. Imagine it, an entire nation gripped by terror because a voice told a story. Never before has sound wielded such sovereign power over imagination. And then, footsteps on the stage, a swell of strings, a gunshot. Film, that silent flicker of the early years, finds its voice. In 1927, Al Jolson sings, and the world tilts. The talkies arrive, and with them, a new empire of noise. Movie palaces roar with music and dialogue. The dream factory hums like a turbine, pouring stories into the public ear. Sound is no longer fleeting, it is immortal. It can be pressed into shellac, captured on celluloid, broadcast through the sky. It can echo forever. The ephemeral becomes eternal, and in that eternity, silence dies a little more. By mid-century, the air is thick with voices, melodies, commands. Radios hum in cars, in kitchens, in factories. Loudspeakers bark orders in stations, in schools, in streets. Even war is wired for sound, marching songs, morale broadcasts, speeches crackling from field radios. And then, the ultimate irony, the first bombs that fall from the sky do so in silence, but their aftermath, the sirens, the screams, will define the modern ear. Still, the century is young. Ahead lie new marvels, television, tape recorders, stereophonic dreams. And after that, a transistor no bigger than a thumb, slipping music into every pocket. The conquest of silence is far from over, it is only gathering speed. So, let us draw the curtain on the 30s, the 40s, the first half of the 20th century, a time when sound became mass, modern, inescapable. Next comes the age of personal noise, portable radios, hi-fi systems, jukeboxes, rock and roll. An era when the question changes from where did silence go, to do we even miss it? But before we step there, pause. Can you hear it? Beneath the croon of a radio, the chatter of the street, the hum of electric wires, silence, faint and fugitive, breathing its last. The war ends, and with it, the planet exhales, a long, ragged breath that hums with static. Victory parades thrum with drums and brass, but listen closer, in the lull after the cannon fire, after the sirens, a new kind of sound begins to bloom. It is smaller, brighter, more intimate. The machines that once whispered death now purr with promise. The 20th century's second act is about to begin, and it begins with a hum. 1945, factories that forged bombers and bullets now turn their genius to peacetime luxuries. Steel becomes chrome, rivets become buttons, and into American living rooms, and soon, living rooms everywhere, march the shining idols of consumer culture, refrigerators, televisions, and above all, the transistor radio. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, the stage belongs to vinyl. Shellac, brittle, scratchy, war scarce, is dethroned by polyvinyl chloride, sleek and durable. The LP arrives in 1948, bearing a simple promise: long play. 20 minutes per side. No more leaping up to flip the record every 2 songs. It is a revolution of convenience and continuity. Music can now stretch out, breathe, tell stories. Classical works unfold in full splendor. Jazz sessions sprawl luxuriously across a disc. And the 45, the LP's cheeky little sibling, struts in for the kids, 2 songs, cheap, perfect for the teenage pocket. Ah yes, the teenager. Before the war, adolescence was a liminal mist. After the war, it crystallizes into a market demographic. They have allowances, jukebox nickels, restless blood. And they want their own sound, not the swooning strings of their parents, but something hotter, rawer, with a beat like a racing pulse. The answer is incubating in the sweaty dance halls of Memphis, in the barrel houses of the Delta, in the gospel throb churches of the South. Rhythm and blues, country twang, and a backbeat sharp as a switchblade, they fuse into rock and roll, and the world tilts on its axis. Elvis swivels into history. Chuck Berry grins that electric grin and sets guitars ablaze. Little Richard hollers like a holy roller on fire. It is loud, lewd, and to some, lethal, a sonic delinquent corrupting youth. Preachers thunder. Parents wring hands. Politicians mutter about jungle rhythms. And the teenagers? They turn the dial louder, because for the first time in history, the soundscape is theirs. How? 2 inventions, small in size, seismic in effect. First, the jukebox, squatting like a neon idol in every diner, every soda shop. Drop a coin, and your song, the one that speaks your secret language, blasts into the air. Second, the transistor radio, unveiled in 1954, a marvel of miniaturization. No tubes, no fragility, no tether to the wall. You can cradle music in your palm, slip it in your pocket, carry it to the beach, the ball game, the back seat of a car parked under a harvest moon. Music is no longer a parlor event, it is a constant companion. The transistor whispers, sound is freedom. Sound is youth. Meanwhile, the grown-ups retreat to their own shrines, the hi-fi system. This is no tinny radio. This is a temple of fidelity, gleaming amplifiers, heavy turntables, speakers like altars. The hi-fi cult blooms, with its sacred texts, High Fidelity magazine, its priests, the audio engineers, its rituals, the careful lowering of the stylus, the reverent hush before the first note. Suburban basements become listening sanctuaries, where men, always men, tweak treble knobs as if tuning the cosmos. Yet for all its intimacy, post-war sound is not shy. Cities bristle with new voices, the hawk of disc jockeys, the chatter of talk shows, the boom of commercials. Madison Avenue discovers that jingles worm deeper into the brain than slogans ever did. Music becomes the handmaiden of marketing. It sells soap, soda, cigarettes, the dream of happiness in a chrome kitchen. Sing along with us, croons the ad, and the nation obliges. And then, television. Oh, the paradox. TV is a visual medium, yet it colonizes the ear as much as the eye. Theme songs become national passwords: Dragnet, I Love Lucy, The Lone Ranger. Sitcom laugh tracks teach America when to laugh. Commercial jingles choreograph desire. Silence, once the default of home life, now feels alien, awkward, almost indecent. If the radio was a companion, the television is a roommate, loud, opinionated, always there. Noise invades not just homes but highways. The post-war boom builds ribbons of asphalt, and with them, the growl of engines multiplies. Car culture spawns drive-ins, car hops, and the phenomenon of cruising with the radio on. Detroit's chrome chariots come with dashboard radios as standard issue, so the teenage soundtrack rolls out of the living room and onto the open road. Freedom now has a soundtrack, and it is loud. But listen closer. Beneath the exuberance, a new unease hums. Psychologists warn of audio fatigue. Sociologists fret about sonic saturation. In 1952, the New York Times runs a headline, "Noise, the New Menace to Health." Doctors link city noise to ulcers, hypertension, nervous breakdowns. Yet who can stop the tide? The factories that roared for war now roar for peace, and the world hums with production, with movement, with music. By the late 50s, the soundtrack of life is relentless, the squeal of tires, the snap of soda caps, the rat-tat-tat of typewriters, the croon of Sinatra, the shriek of Little Richard. Silence has been shoved to the margins, into forests, deserts, monasteries. And even there, the distant whine of a jet may slice the sky. Ahead lies the 60s, a decade that will detonate the soundscape like no other. Amplifiers will swell to stadium size. Guitars will scream like jet engines. Protest chants will roar through city streets. The transistor will shrink again, slip into a device called the Walkman, and finally, headphones will privatize noise, sealing the ear in a velvet cocoon of sound. But for now, the world sways in the glow of jukebox neon, hi-fi warmth, transistor static. It is the dawn of a new religion, the worship of music as identity, as rebellion, as love. The pulpit is a stage, the gospel is a backbeat, and the congregation, oh, the congregation is dancing. The age of mass sound has flowered into the age of personal noise. And its prophet, its soundtrack, its thunder, is rock and roll. The 1960s do not merely arrive, they erupt, like a feedback howl through an overdriven amp. If the 50s were a steady backbeat, the 60s are a drum solo, wild, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. Sound no longer just accompanies life, it leads the march, storms the barricades, wraps itself around identity like a second skin. First, the technology. The LP, once a marvel, now becomes a manifesto. In the 50s, albums were often scattershot affairs, a few hits padded with filler. But in the 60s? The album becomes an art form. Musicians begin to think in terms of sides, not songs. Each groove, a deliberate stroke in a larger canvas. Rubber Soul, Pet Sounds, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, these are not collections of tunes, they are worlds, sonic novels, meant to be experienced whole. And then, stereo. 2 channels, left and right. Before, sound was monophonic, a single beam. Now it blooms, expands, embraces. Engineers play with space, drums pan hard left, vocals ghosting right, strings swelling in the center. The living room becomes a theater, the record a three-dimensional sculpture in air. But stereo is expensive, elite, at first. Soon, it trickles down, and once you've heard stereo, mono feels like black and white after Technicolor. Meanwhile, the transistor completes its quiet coup. The pocket radio, already a teenage talisman, now pairs with another innovation, the earphone. Just one, mind you, a monaural bud, like a secret piped into your skull. For the first time, music becomes portable privacy. On the bus, at the park, in the parental living room, you can vanish into your own soundtrack. It is a small step toward a future where sound follows us like a shadow. But the 60s are not just about listening. They are about making noise, glorious, defiant noise. The decade begins in the jitter of civil rights sit-ins, the thrum of marches, the cadences of sermons amplified through tinny PAs. Dr. King's voice, rolling like thunder, becomes a national soundscape. Protest learns rhythm, learns rhyme, becomes chant, becomes song. We shall overcome swells in churches, then in streets, then in the heart of America. Vietnam escalates, and so does the volume of dissent. Folk singers shoulder guitars like rifles. Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Phil Oakes, minstrels of outrage, troubadours of conscience. Their voices are not sweet, they are sharp, serrated, built to cut through static. But even Dylan, prophet of the acoustic, plugs in at Newport, and the crowd howls betrayal. He shrugs and turns the amps up. That shrug? It is the shrug heard round the world. Because the 60s belong to the amplifier. Enter the electric guitar, no longer a rhythm instrument, but a weapon, a howling beast. Fender Stratocaster. Gibson Les Paul. Names that will be carved into the altar of rock. Jimi Hendrix coaxes galaxies from 6 strings, bending notes into liquid fire. Pete Townsend windmills through power chords like a lumberjack felling forests. And the volume, dear God, the volume. Stadium concerts appear, dwarfing the old dance halls. The sound system swells to Leviathan size, birthing a new profession, the roadie, the high priest of decibels. This is not mere entertainment. It is ritual. Woodstock, 500,000 bodies pulsing to a wall of sound that rolls like a tidal wave across muddy fields. The crowd does not just hear the music, it inhales it, exhales it, becomes it. The 60s teach us that sound can bind strangers into tribes, fuse politics with ecstasy, turn a concert into a movement. And the palette of sound widens beyond imagining. Eastern drones seep into Western pop. The sitar twangs in psychedelic gardens. Studio trickery births loops, backward tapes, phasing, effects that make music swirl like a kaleidoscope. Brian Wilson builds symphonies out of surf songs. The Beatles, cloistered in Abbey Road, paint sonic frescoes with mellotrons and tape machines until the studio itself becomes an instrument. Not all is utopia. Cities grow louder, denser, harsher. The automobile chorus swells. Jet engines scream over suburbs. Construction hammers pound like relentless drums. Sociologists coin terms, noise pollution. Doctors warn of urban deafness. But amid the clamor, a curious thing happens. People start to choose their noise. They curate it, control it, crave it. The headphone, still a clunky contraption, offers sanctuary, a bubble of personal acoustics. When the outside world roars, you slip on your private soundtrack and vanish. Yet the world keeps roaring. By decade's end, the dream curdles. The hopeful harmonies of 64 give way to the discord of 69, assassinations, riots, my lie. Even music grows darker, fuzzed out, distorted, apocalyptic. The Beatles fracture. Altamont bleeds. The 60s close not with a hymn but with a scream, Jimmy's guitar wailing the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock, twisting patriotism into agony, beauty into chaos. Still, something profound has shifted. Silence, once the default, is now a luxury. Sound is everywhere, elastic, omnipresent. It shapes identity, fuels rebellion, sells dreams. It invades politics, religion, intimacy. And it will not retreat. Ahead looms the 70s, the headphone will slim down, the cassette will slip into pockets, and the private listening revolution will begin in earnest. Disco will light the dance floor. Punk will snarl in the alleys. Synthesizers will hum the future. And lurking in the wings, an invention that will change everything, though no one yet suspects, digital. But that is tomorrow's overture. For now, the 60s fade like the last feedback note of a Hendrix solo, hanging in the air, shimmering, defiant, refusing to die. The 1970s arrive not with a bang but with a hiss, a tape hiss, soft and constant, like static on the edge of memory. It is the decade of analog warmth, of magnetic reels spinning in plastic shells, of sound that feels touchable, like velvet under the fingers. If the 60s blew the doors off music, the 70s invite you inside, dim the lights, and hand you a drink. First, let us bow before a new monarch, the cassette tape. Compact. Portable. Indestructible, well, almost. Compared to the LP's fragile grandeur, the cassette is humble, democratic. You can slip it in your pocket, stash it in your glove compartment, toss it in a backpack without fear of catastrophic scratches. But its true magic lies in rewriting. For the first time, the listener becomes the curator, the editor, the DJ of their own life. With a simple press of record, you can tape songs off the radio, copy albums from a friend, or craft something unprecedented, the mixtape. Ah, the mixtape, a love letter in magnetic code, a diary of desire and longing. One side for the slow burns, the ballads that whisper I miss you. Flip it over, and side B detonates with the tracks that make your heart race. The mixtape is not just music, it is autobiography. It is the sound of agency, of listeners refusing to be passive consumers. The industry will gnash its teeth over home taping, but the genie is out of the bottle, spooling across billions of cassettes. And with the cassette comes another revolution, the car stereo. True, radios have long serenaded motorists, but now, with an 8-track or cassette deck, the car becomes a private concert hall on wheels. Road trips throb with Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, or, depending on your leanings, Donna Summer's disco grooves. The freeway hum blends with bass lines, the open road becomes a soundtrack in search of a movie. Meanwhile, the domestic temple of sound, the hi-fi system, grows into an altar of chrome and walnut veneer. Stacks of components, turntable, tuner, amplifier, cassette deck, speakers tall as tombstones. Audiophiles argue over signal-to-noise ratios, drool over Japanese engineering. Marantz, Pioneer, Technics, these names gleam like badges of status. Owning a hi-fi is not mere consumption, it is a declaration, I take sound seriously. But this decade is not just about how we hear, it is about what we hear, and oh, what a banquet it is. Rock, swollen to stadium size in the 60s, now fragments like a prism. Out of its shards spill prog rock, towering epics, concept albums that demand attention and patience. Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, their songs are mazes, their albums, labyrinths. For those who crave something dirtier, grittier, there is punk. A backlash, a sneer, 3 chords, and the truth screamed through a busted amp. The Ramones, the Sex Pistols, they strip rock to the bone and then set the bones on fire. And then, in the glittering darkness, disco. Born in clubs where marginalized bodies seek sanctuary, Black, Latino, queer communities building utopias under mirrored balls. 4 on the floor beats, strings soaring like champagne bubbles, bass lines that never quit. Donna Summer moans ecstasy. The Bee Gees falsetto into the stratosphere. By decade's end, disco conquers the mainstream, and the backlash comes swift, ugly, laced with more than a little fear of the other. But in those fevered nights at Studio 54, on dance floors glowing like molten glass, sound becomes liberation, pure, ecstatic, communal. Elsewhere, in the shadows, electronic sound begins to whisper its promise. The synthesizer, once a room-sized curiosity, shrinks to something a band can haul on tour. Kraftwerk, those Teutonic futurists, lay down robotic hymns to highways and data streams. Giorgio Moroder welds disco to circuitry, birthing a new creature, electronic dance music. The future is humming, faint but undeniable. And yet, for all its innovations, the 70s are still tethered to tangibility. Music is something you hold, a vinyl sleeve wide as a pizza box, a cassette that clicks in your palm. You read liner notes, trace fingers over cover art, feel the heft of sound as object. This physicality matters. It roots music in ritual, the slide of the record from its sleeve, the lowering of the needle, the patient wait through the hiss before the song blooms. Still, a restlessness stirs. Technology is miniaturizing. Components shrink, prices drop. Headphones, once the province of audiophiles and telephone operators, are slimming down, losing weight, inching toward ubiquity. Somewhere in a Sony lab, an engineer wonders, what if music could follow you, not just in your car, not just in your living room, but everywhere? What if the soundtrack of your life was not imagined, but real? The answer will come in a plastic rectangle no bigger than a paperback, the Walkman. It does not exist yet, not quite. But the pieces are falling into place, cassettes, miniaturized electronics, the hunger for mobility. The Walkman will explode the boundary between public and private sound. It will make every sidewalk a stage, every commute a score. And once it arrives, there will be no going back. But for now, the 70s hum on, a decade of hiss and glamour, of bedroom mixtapes and mirrorball epiphanies, of sprawling double albums and snarling punk EPs. A decade that teaches us this: music is not just something we consume. It is something we inhabit, something we bend to our will, something that shapes who we are. Ahead, the 80s gleam like neon, sharper, faster, louder. The Walkman will land like a meteor. MTV will turn music into moving pictures. Compact discs will promise perfection, and digital will whisper of immortality. But that is the next track. For now, the 70s spin to a close, the needle tracing its final spiral, the hiss fading into silence, or rather, into the next song. Because in this story, silence is never allowed for long. The 1980s do not tiptoe in, they swagger, neon-lit and shoulder-padded, to the pounding of a drum machine. Sound in this decade is not background, it is spectacle. It demands attention, insists on being seen as much as heard. If the 70s gave us intimacy through cassettes, the 80s turned that intimacy portable. The mantra is simple: sound should follow you everywhere. Enter the object that will reshape listening forever, the Walkman. Released by Sony in 1979, it blooms in the 80s like an invasive species, unstoppable, omnipresent. At first glance, it is unassuming, a brick-sized rectangle of plastic and metal, 2 headphone jacks, a tiny volume slider, and buttons that click with satisfying certainty. But its promise is radical: music without location. No living room. No car. No stereo altar looming in a corner like a household god. Instead, you clip the Walkman to your belt, slip on your foam-padded headphones, and suddenly the city belongs to you. Consider the psychology of this. For millennia, sound was public. Music spilled into the world, on street corners, in cathedrals, in concert halls. Even the home stereo of the 70s was a communal affair. But now, with the Walkman, you can seal yourself in a sonic bubble. The sidewalk becomes your stage, the morning commute a private movie scored by your own hand-picked soundtrack. Joggers thud along to synth beats, office workers slip into pastel daydreams with Duran Duran humming in their ears. Music becomes interior, intimate, invisible. No one else knows what you're hearing. That secrecy feels almost illicit, like a diary pressed against your brain. This is not just technology, it is liberation. Portable sound untethers music from geography, from architecture, from the tyranny of shared taste. You no longer wait for your song to come on the radio. You curate, you control, you conquer the soundscape. And the cassette, humble hero of the 70s, is the perfect accomplice. Pre-recorded tapes surge in sales, but so do blank ones. The mixtape becomes a global love language, a coded message slipped into a friend's Walkman case. Here, it says, "This is me," in songs. But the Walkman is only half the revolution. The other half explodes in August 1981 when a new cable channel airs its first broadcast, MTV. Its opening salvo? A song called Video killed the radio star. Prophetic, cheeky, and almost true. For the first time, music is no longer just sound, it is image, a kinetic spectacle designed for the screen. The music video is born, and it is ravenous. Songs become short films. Stars become actors, fashion icons, demigods. Madonna vogues her way into immortality. Michael Jackson moonwalks across television history. Duran Duran make yacht rock literal with yachts, cameras lingering on champagne flutes and sun-kissed cheekbones. MTV does something profound. It makes music visual in a way the album cover never could. Before, you imagined the band while listening. Now, the image arrives prepackaged, curated, looped endlessly on screens in living rooms, bars, dorms. Image and sound fuse into a single currency of cool. If you want a hit, you need a video. Period. And while we're watching, listening, consuming at hyperspeed, technology hums forward. The 80s adore polish, and analog, warm, hissy, imperfect, suddenly feels shabby. Enter the compact disc, or CD, unveiled in 1982 with a promise as glittering as its surface, perfect sound, forever. No scratches, no warps, no hiss, just crystalline clarity etched in digital code. At first, the CD is exotic, expensive, almost alien. A small silver disc, shimmering like something smuggled from the future. But by the late 80s, it storms the market, toppling vinyl from its throne. Audiophiles debate, is this progress, or is something lost when sound is digitized, sterilized, stripped of analog warmth? The debate will rage for decades, but in the 80s, the verdict seems clear: digital is destiny. Meanwhile, genres mutate at breakneck speed. Synth-pop dominates, its glossy arpeggios and drum machines pulsing like neon veins. Depeche Mode, Pet Shop Boys, New Order. Hip-hop, born in the Bronx in the 70s, now strides into mainstream consciousness with Run DMC, Public Enemy, LL Cool J, voices rhyming over beats built from fragments of other songs, an art form both defiant and ingenious. Hair metal preens on MTV, its riffs lacquered as heavily as its musicians' hair. And in underground clubs, the future stirs, house music, techno, genres built for machines and bodies, destined to detonate in the next decade's raves. But always, the Walkman hums at the heart of it all, a symbol of an era when music becomes personal property, carried close as a talisman. There is something almost poignant about the sight: a teenager on a bus, forehead against the window, headphones clamped tight, the outside world a blur while inside, an anthem roars. What is she listening to? You will never know. And that mystery, private, portable, inviolable, changes everything. The 80s teach us that music is no longer bound to the collective. It is atomized, individualized, a soundtrack for the self. And yet, paradoxically, it becomes more visual, more spectacular, more dependent on image than ever. Two currents, swirling in opposite directions, the inner world of the Walkman, the outer theater of MTV. Together, they make the decade electric, synthetic, unforgettable. Ahead lies the 90s, a decade of contradictions, of grunge and gangsta rap, of raves glowing under blacklight, of MP3 files trickling through phone lines like illicit contraband. A decade where music becomes not just portable, but virtual. Where the question shifts from what album do you own, to what files can you find. But that is another track. For now, picture the scene, a city street at night, slick with rain, neon flickering on puddles. A teenager walks alone, headphones glowing faint orange at the tips, the Walkman thudding gently against her hip. She presses play. The world disappears. The music begins. The 1990s arrive like a deep breath after the glitter storm of the 80s, a little grungier, a little less glossy, and humming with contradictions. If the 80s were about spectacle, the 90s seem, at first, to crave authenticity. Rock bands ditch sequins for flannel. Hairspray gives way to bedhead. But beneath the surface, the decade is laying wires for a quiet revolution, one that will tear music from its physical body and fling it into the infinite. Let's start at the surface, the shiny discs still spinning in our stereos. Compact discs dominate the decade with imperial confidence. By the early 90s, the CD is not a luxury, it is the default. Record stores shimmer like jewelry boxes, walls gleaming with jewel cases lined in perfect rows. Album art shrinks from vinyl's canvas to a 4-inch square, yet somehow this feels futuristic, sophisticated. The pitch is irresistible, crystal clear sound, no rewinding, no hiss, no pops. And for the music industry, CDs are a golden goose. They cost pennies to manufacture but sell for nearly $20 a piece. People buy them by the armload. Not just new albums, but old ones, again, in digital form. The industry calls it recataloguing. You had the vinyl. Maybe you bought the cassette. But here's the CD, the definitive version. Fans oblige. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Beethoven, all scrubbed clean, dressed in silver, repackaged for a digital age. Money flows like champagne. It feels, for a moment, like the future is locked down, profitable, eternal. Meanwhile, genres bloom in chaotic profusion. Grunge storms out of Seattle with flannel shirts and guitars slung low, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. Their sound is raw, loud, defiantly anti-glam. Kurt Cobain becomes an unwilling prophet of a generation that sneers at excess and craves something real, even if that realness is soaked in distortion and despair. Across the country, hip-hop surges into its golden age. What began in block parties now sits atop the charts. Tupac and Biggie, Nas and Wu-Tang, voices spitting truth over beats that echo from car stereos and boomboxes. Lyrics become poetry, journalism, confession, prophecy. And with success comes tragedy, the East Coast, West Coast feud ending in gunfire and grief. Elsewhere, pop refuses to die quietly. In the late 90s, it returns in sparkling vengeance. Britney Spears, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, choruses engineered for maximum catchiness, videos choreographed down to the hip thrust. Teen pop rules MTV once again, but now it shares airtime with a new breed of superstars, alternative bands like Radiohead, whose OK Computer hums with alienation, and electronic pioneers who turn raves into temples of sound. Techno, house, trance, words that sound like passwords to a new world, pulsing under blacklight in warehouses and fields. And then, a whisper. A rumor. A program called Napster. It appears in 1999, a mischievous sprite conjured by a teenager named Sean Fanning in a dorm room. The premise is simple. What if you could share your MP3 files, compressed audio that shrinks a song from 40 megabytes to 4, with anyone, anywhere, for free? No shipping, no discs, no jewel cases. Just data, skipping through the wires like contraband lightning. MP3 itself had been lurking in the background since the early 90s, an obscure compression format dreamed up by engineers who never imagined it would unhinge an empire. But combine that format with the internet, still clunky, still dial-up, but spreading fast, and you have a Molotov cocktail lobbed at the cathedral of the music industry. At first, it feels like magic. You search for a song, click, and there it is, downloaded in minutes, sometimes hours, but, crucially, for free. No $20 CDs. No plastic. No store. Just abundance, infinite and untethered. For college students, for teenagers, for anyone who ever stared at a rack of CDs and sighed, it is liberation. For record labels, it is apocalypse. The lawsuits come swiftly. The industry paints Napster as a den of thieves, a plague on artists, a digital pirate ship. They sue, they shout, they panic. But the genie is out of the bottle. Even when Napster is crushed in court, dozens of imitators sprout like Hydra heads, LimeWire, Kazaa, BearShare. Music becomes liquid, uncontrollable, impossible to fence in. And here is the quiet tragedy. This is the moment the business model cracks, and no one, not labels, not artists, not even fans, knows what will replace it. The old world of physical sales begins to crumble, but the new world has no currency, only chaos. For a few wild years, everything feels free, but nothing feels solid. Yet beneath that chaos lies a deeper shift. Music is becoming weightless. No discs. No cases. No shelves sagging with albums. Just files, floating in the ether, summoned at will. Ownership begins to feel quaint, almost irrelevant. What matters now is access. And that idea, that access trumps possession, will define the next century. For now, picture 1999, a teenager hunched over a beige desktop computer, the glow of a CRT monitor painting their face blue. The dial-up modem screeches. A progress bar crawls across the screen. The song, maybe Metallica, maybe Britney, trickles down at 3 kilobytes per second. It will take 20 minutes. They wait, headphones ready, heart racing. Because when it finishes, they will have something extraordinary, music that feels infinite. Music unbound. But the story doesn't end with piracy. In the ashes of Napster, a new vision rises, one that will transform not just how we listen, but how we live. A world where music doesn't live on your shelf or even your hard drive, but streams from the cloud, anytime, anywhere. A world built on subscriptions, algorithms, and infinite playlists. That is the next chapter, the 2000s, the fall of the old empire, the rise of iTunes, the birth of streaming, and the slow erasure of silence. The new millennium dawns under the flicker of a fluorescent screen. The year is 2001. The world has just stumbled into an era that feels wired, restless, and digital. Napster lies bleeding in a courtroom, dragged down by lawsuits from the music industry and a very angry Metallica. But the damage is done. The people have tasted infinite music, and they will not go back to buying $18 CDs without a fight. The record labels, lumbering giants that they are, scramble for a solution. Their first instinct? Fear. They plaster CD cases with warnings. Piracy is a crime. FBI logos glare from the back covers like steel doors. They sue college students for downloading songs, dragging teenagers and grandmothers into courtrooms. It's a public relations disaster. The lawsuits make the industry look cruel, out of touch, desperate. Meanwhile, the pirates adapt. Napster dies, but LimeWire, Kazaa, Morpheus, eDonkey, they all rise like ghosts. Peer-to-peer networks mutate, grow teeth, become harder to kill. The genie is not just out of the bottle is smashed to glitter. And in this chaos, a truth crystallizes: the industry can't fight the internet. It has to join it. Enter Apple. At this moment, Apple is not the juggernaut we know today. It is a struggling computer company with a handful of loyal fans and one mercurial visionary named Steve Jobs. Jobs sees what the labels cannot. The problem is not just piracy. The problem is friction. People don't want to steal music because they love crime. They steal because it's easier than buying. They want music now, instantly, without driving to a store or paying a fortune for a CD with one good song and 12 fillers. Jobs walks into the lion's den, the offices of the major labels, and pitches a radical idea: iTunes. A legal digital marketplace where you can buy individual songs for 99 cents, download them instantly, and own them forever. No jewel cases. No plastic. Just pure sound, yours with a click. The labels, bleeding from piracy wounds, agree. They hate the terms, they hate Jobs' smugness, but they have no choice. On April 28, 2003, the iTunes Store launches. Its interface is clean, intuitive, almost playful. No great corporate gloom, just bright icons and easy clicks. And the pricing? Genius. $1 feels like nothing. Why risk viruses and lawsuits for LimeWire when you can have a legal copy of your favorite track for pocket change? In the first week, iTunes sells 1 million songs. A digital gold rush begins. But Jobs isn't done. He knows people want not just easy buying, but easy carrying. CDs scratch. Discmen skip. MP3 players exist, but they're clunky, ugly, and hold maybe 100 songs. Jobs imagines something sleeker, something you can slip into your pocket, 1,000 songs in a device no bigger than a deck of cards. And so, in October 2001, Apple unveils the iPod. White earbuds dangle like an invitation. The tagline whispers seduction: 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's not just a gadget, it's an aesthetic. Minimalist, futuristic, almost smug in its simplicity. Soon, those white cords become a cultural status symbol. On subways, in coffee shops, on city streets, they signal something: you are modern, you are mobile, you are wired into the new world. The iPod doesn't just change listening, it changes identity. Your music is no longer a room of shelves or a car visor full of discs. It's a playlist, a curated self that travels everywhere. Shuffle becomes philosophy, life as randomness, as surprise. For the first time, you can carry the Beatles, Biggie, and Beethoven side by side, collapsing genre walls in your pocket. But while Apple builds its empire, the record labels cling to old reflexes. They still dream of control, of walls and gates. They toy with digital rights management, DRM, code that locks songs to certain devices, preventing copying. Jobs plays along at first, but secretly, he knows DRM is doomed. People hate chains, even digital ones. Eventually, Apple kills DRM and sets the music free, legally, anyway. For a few golden years, iTunes and the iPod feel like salvation. The music industry stabilizes. Consumers are happy. Piracy slows, not gone, but diminished. Apple becomes a kingmaker, dictating prices, even album release strategies. The record labels, who once ruled like pharaohs, now kneel to a computer company. Yet beneath the triumph lurks an irony: the very thing that saved the industry, digital downloads, plants the seeds of its next upheaval. Because now, music is data, and once it's data, why own it at all? If you can buy a song for $1, why not rent every song ever made for a monthly fee? Why not stream instead of store? That question is already whispering in the dark corners of the internet, where new players are circling. Companies like Pandora and Spotify are sketching a future where you don't download at all. Where music flows like water, endless, seamless, always on. And when that flood comes, it will wash away even the empire Steve Jobs built. But before we rush ahead, pause for a moment in 2004 on a city street. An iPod spins in your pocket. The white earbuds hum your private soundtrack as you weave through the crowd. You are in control, the DJ of your own life. It feels like freedom. It feels like forever. And yet, in the distance, the first ripples of streaming are already rolling toward shore. Next comes part 23, Streaming's Shadow, how Pandora and Spotify cracked the final code, and why music will never again belong to us. The year is 2005, and something strange is happening in the undercurrent of the music world. For the past few years, iTunes and the iPod have ruled with almost tyrannical elegance. You pay 99 cents, you download, you own. It feels clean. It feels permanent. But permanence, as it turns out, is a heavy thing in a world that's learning to love the weightless. Because let's be honest, even dragging files into iTunes is work. Making playlists, syncing your iPod, clearing space, it's friction. And while consumers endure it for now, a new question is spreading like static on a pirate radio frequency. What if music didn't live on your hard drive at all? What if it just flowed? Enter Pandora. Launched to the public in 2005, it's less a jukebox and more a magic trick. You type in a song you like, say, Hotel California, and suddenly, without owning a single MP3, music streams from the ether. Pandora is powered by something called the Music Genome Project, a sprawling database that breaks songs into genetic codes, melody, harmony, rhythm, timbre, hundreds of traits. The algorithm becomes your personal DJ, pulling tracks that match your taste. It feels alive, adaptive, almost clairvoyant. But Pandora has limits. You can't pick exact songs. You can't rewind. It's radio with a brain, but still radio. And here's the real killer, in the US, it's shackled by licensing restrictions. Every stream costs Pandora money. The more you listen, the deeper they bleed. They are not building an empire, they are clinging to a life raft. Across the Atlantic, however, a different beast is stirring, a company that isn't content to imitate radio. It wants the jukebox of the universe. It wants every song, instantly, on demand. Its name? Spotify. The story begins in Stockholm, 2006, in a modest office where two men, Daniel Ek and Martin Lawrenson, stare into the future and see something radical. They believe piracy isn't a moral problem, it's an engineering problem. People pirate because it's faster and easier than legal options. So make something faster. Make something easier. Make something better than free. Spotify becomes an obsession. For 2 years, Ek and Lawrenson negotiate with labels, wrangle with licensing, and build a platform that feels like magic. When Spotify launches in 2008 in select European markets, it detonates the old paradigm. For the first time, you can type any song, hit play, and it starts instantly. No downloads, no syncing, no storage anxiety. It streams. It just happens. And the price? $0 if you can stomach the ads. For a monthly fee, You can banish ads and unlock unlimited skips, higher quality, offline mode. But even the free tier feels revolutionary. It whispers a dangerous idea: why own music when you can summon it like a spell? At first, the labels hesitate. They fear another Napster, a Trojan horse wrapped in charm. But desperation softens pride. CD sales are collapsing. iTunes growth is slowing. Piracy still prowls the seas. So, grudgingly, they license their catalogs to Spotify. It feels like a gamble. It feels like surrender. By 2011, Spotify leaps across the Atlantic into the US market, and the dominoes start to fall. Suddenly, streaming is not a novelty, it's an inevitability. Competitors sprout like weeds: Dio, Deezer, Grooveshark, each chasing the same dream. But Spotify runs faster, fueled by venture capital and ex-ruthless vision, ubiquity or death. The music listener, meanwhile, undergoes a quiet revolution. For decades, collecting music was a ritual, almost a personality. Vinyl lined shelves like trophies. CDs gleamed in towers. Even MP3 libraries carried a sense of ownership. But now, music becomes a service, not a thing. You don't own songs, you rent experiences. Playlists replace albums. Algorithms replace DJs. The concept of my music dissolves into the cloud. It's intoxicating. It's terrifying. And it's changing everything, not just how we listen, but how music is made. Artists begin to notice the math of streaming: short intros, catchy hooks early, songs optimized for algorithmic survival. The album, once a sacred text, bends to the playlist era. Meanwhile, Apple watches with narrowed eyes. Steve Jobs, who famously hated the idea of renting music, people want to own their songs, is gone by 2011. The new Apple, pragmatic and profit-hungry, launches Apple Music in 2015. They are late, but their war chest is deep. Amazon joins the fight. Google, too. Streaming is no longer a rebellion. It is the industry. And yet, every step forward raises the same uneasy question: what happens when music belongs to no one? When your entire library vanishes the second you stop paying? When the playlists you love exist only on someone else's server? Convenience has triumphed, but permanence has died. By the late 2010s, the numbers are staggering. Streaming doesn't just dominate, it devours. CD sales collapse to near zero. Digital downloads, the empire Jobs built, fall off a cliff. Even piracy withers, not from enforcement, but from irrelevance. Why steal what you can stream legally for free? The irony is exquisite. The industry that fought Napster with lawsuits and DRM now thrives on the very idea Napster embodied: music as an infinite, weightless flow. And in this new ocean, two things become clear. Music is no longer a product. It's a utility. Whoever controls the pipe controls the culture. But there's one last twist in this story, one last battlefield that even Spotify didn't see coming. Because streaming doesn't just change distribution, it changes the relationship between artists and fans. And in that crack, a new force will rise, promising to rewrite the rules again: direct-to-fan platforms, micro-communities, and the rebirth of ownership in a digital skin. By 2017, streaming isn't just the dominant form of music consumption, it is the bloodstream of the industry. Revenue from physical sales and digital downloads plummets like a stone, while streaming revenue soars, dragging a nearly bankrupt music business back from the abyss. The labels breathe again. Spotify basks in glory. Apple Music lurks like a sleeping dragon. Amazon hums quietly in the background, leveraging Prime. On paper, it looks like a golden age. Music has never been more accessible. A kid in rural India can hear the same Drake track at the same moment as a lawyer in Manhattan. Barriers of geography and cost have collapsed. Music feels infinite. But here's the dark underside: infinity has a price, and someone has to pay it. Streaming flips the old royalty model inside out. In the CD era, an artist might earn $1 to $2 per album sold. In the iTunes era, they got roughly 70 cents per 99-cent track. But now, for a Spotify stream, the payout is measured in fractions of a cent, roughly $0.003 to $0.005 per stream. Do the math: 1 million streams might bring an artist a few $1,000s before splitting with labels, managers, lawyers. The public assumes that if a song goes viral, the artist gets rich. But the reality is brutal. Unless you're in the hundreds of millions of streams, streaming money barely buys groceries. For mid-tier musicians, it's a death sentence disguised as progress. The old dream, sell 50,000 CDs and make a living, is gone. Now you need 50 million streams to survive. And the gatekeepers? They've merely changed uniforms. The radio DJ is dead, but the algorithm is king. Getting onto a Spotify editorial playlist like Rap Caviar or Today's Top Hits can make a career. Miss the playlist, and you vanish into the void. The irony is almost poetic. We left behind the tyranny of record stores and radio charts only to kneel before the tyranny of recommendation engines. Artists start to grumble, then roar. Radiohead's Tom York calls Spotify the last desperate fart of a dying corpse. Taylor Swift pulls her catalog, declaring that art has value and shouldn't be free. For a while, Swift becomes the lightning rod of the debate. Is she greedy, or is she right? Spoiler, she's right. Eventually, Spotify caves, agreeing to some concessions, but the fundamental math doesn't change. Meanwhile, Bandcamp quietly becomes a lifeline for independent musicians. Its model is almost quaint. Fans buy digital albums and merch, often paying more than the minimum price out of goodwill. Artists keep 85% of the revenue. There's no algorithmic overlord, no endless scroll of content. Just direct transactions between creator and listener. It feels human. But Bandcamp is an outlier, a niche. The mainstream lives in the stream, and the stream runs through tech giants who treat music as a loss leader, a lure for ecosystems. Apple doesn't care if Apple Music profits, it sells iPhones. Amazon ties music to Prime. Google bounces between strategies like a distracted cat. Then comes the weird rebellion, a movement that seems almost absurd at first glance. In the late 2010s, a new technology slithers into the cultural bloodstream: blockchain. Most people think of it as the engine behind Bitcoin, a volatile casino for digital gold diggers. But a handful of futurists see something else: a way to own digital art again. Enter NFTs, non-fungible tokens. For musicians battered by streaming's economics, NFTs whisper a seductive promise: scarcity in an age of infinite abundance. Instead of chasing fractions of a cent from streams, why not sell a limited edition digital album, provably unique, verifiable on the blockchain, for hundreds, even thousands of dollars to superfans? Suddenly, the old ritual of collecting music is reborn in a new, cryptographic skin. The experiments come fast. Kings of Leon release an album as an NFT. Grimes sells digital art tied to music for millions. Independent artists make more in a weekend than in years of streaming revenue. It feels like a revolution until reality intrudes. Gas fees, scams, environmental backlash, and the sheer speculative madness of the NFT bubble make the movement feel like a fever dream. By 2022, the hype collapses, leaving behind a few winners, many losers, and one lingering question: is true digital ownership possible, or are we trapped in the stream forever? Amid all this, one truth crystallizes: the direct-to-fan model isn't dead, it's mutating. Patreon, Substack, even Discord become new lifelines. Musicians stop chasing algorithms and start nurturing micro-communities where 1,000 loyal fans can matter more than 10 million casual listeners. The future begins to fracture, mass market streaming on one side, intimate digital patronage on the other. And yet, through all the chaos, Spotify stock market drama, label mergers, crypto crashes, one question haunts the industry like a bass line in the dark. If music is infinite, what is it worth? The next chapter will dive into that very paradox and the brutal economics that have pushed musicians into side hustles, TikTok dances, and a never-ending scramble for attention. Because the story of music in the 21st century isn't just about technology. It's about survival in the age of abundance. The year is 2018, and something strange is happening in music. A song isn't just a song anymore, it's a hook for a video, a soundbite for a meme, a background track for a stranger dancing in their bedroom. The battleground has shifted to a new platform, one that seems almost absurd in its simplicity: TikTok. What started as a lip-sync app for teenagers, a reincarnation of musical.ly, becomes an unstoppable cultural force. TikTok doesn't just promote music, it defines it. A 15-second snippet of a track can launch an artist from obscurity to global superstardom overnight. Lil Nas X proves it with Old Town Road. The song wasn't built for radio, it was built for TikTok's algorithmic chaos, riding a wave of memes, duets, and remixes until it breaks the Billboard charts and stays there for a record-shattering 19 weeks. Labels notice. Fast. Suddenly, the question in every A&R meeting isn't "is this a good album?" but "is this TikTokable?" Songs become shorter, hooks appear earlier, intros vanish. There's no time for slow builds in a world where the swipe is ruthless. If you don't grab the listener in 3 seconds, you're dead. This is the attention economy in its purest form: songs as content, artists as influencers, creativity as a treadmill. A generation of musicians grows up knowing they're not just writing music, they're writing viral moments. If your track doesn't trend on TikTok, good luck breaking through. Even legacy acts feel the pressure. When Fleetwood Mac's Dreams goes viral because of a man skateboarding with cranberry juice, the music industry realizes something profound: the algorithm resurrected a 1977 song and made it relevant again, without radio, without marketing, without permission. TikTok isn't just a platform, it's a new kind of record label, and its A&R department is data. Artists don't get signed for having a great demo, they get signed because their song sparked a million dance challenges. Labels now track metrics like user-generated content velocity and engagement arcs. Your worth as a musician is measured in loops, likes, and duets. This changes the very DNA of music. Songs shrink to fit the format. Bridges disappear. Second verses get chopped. Why write a 4-minute ballad when the algorithm wants 20 seconds of dopamine? Pop becomes more percussive, more immediate, less patient. And in the shadows of this cultural shift, a brutal truth emerges: art is losing ground to attention hacks. But here's the irony: while TikTok feels like a chaotic playground, it's also the most powerful music discovery engine in history. Unknown artists have more access to global audiences than ever before. You can be a teenager in Lagos, upload a beat, and watch its soundtrack videos in Los Angeles, Tokyo, and Berlin in a single day. In theory, it's democratizing. In practice, the game is still rigged, because virality is fickle, and TikTok's algorithm is a black box. A song can soar for no reason or die for no reason. The gods of the feed giveth, and the gods taketh away. And so, musicians adapt. They film behind-the-scenes content. They choreograph dances to their own tracks. They turn themselves into brands because music alone isn't enough. The hustle is relentless. If you're not posting, you're disappearing. Some thrive. Others burn out. By the early 2020s, the industry looks nothing like it did in the 90s or even the 2010s. Streaming was supposed to save music. Instead, it turned it into a background hum for social media, where the song is often secondary to the personality performing it. The soundbite is the star. The algorithm is the producer. And musicians? They're fighting for milliseconds of human attention in a sea of infinite distraction. But here's the twist. In the chaos of virality, something unexpected blooms: genre fragmentation. TikTok doesn't care about radio formats. It surfaces sea shanties, Mongolian throat singing, hyperpop, lo-fi beats, and obscure 80s deep cuts with equal indifference. Music culture splinters into micro-scenes, each with its own slang, style, and aesthetic. In a sense, it feels like the early internet again: wild, unpredictable, tribal. For every global hit, there are thousands of tiny communities obsessing over sounds no label executive could predict. Still, the economics remain savage. TikTok fame doesn't always translate to streaming income, and streaming income barely covers the cost of living. Which means artists now rely on touring, merch, brand deals, and, ironically, the very platforms that hollowed out their art. The circle is vicious. And yet, in this hurricane of metrics, dances, and dopamine loops, one question lingers in the quiet moments between scrolls. What happens to music when the song becomes secondary to the scroll? Because if the 2010s were about streaming, and the 2020s are about virality, the next chapter asks something even bigger: can music reclaim its soul in a world where attention is currency? The album, once the sacred unit of music, is gasping for air. For decades, an album was more than just a collection of songs. It was an experience, a statement of intent. From Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to The Dark Side of the Moon, from Lemonade to To Pimp a Butterfly, the album was how artists told stories. You sat down, pressed play, and surrendered to the journey. But in the age of infinite feeds, patience is a luxury no one can afford. The numbers tell a brutal truth: the average skip time on streaming platforms is under 7 seconds. 7 seconds. That's less than it takes for a needle to hit vinyl. If your hook doesn't come fast, you're out. So what happens? Albums shrink. Songs shrink. The old pop standard, 3 minutes, a neat verse-chorus-verse-bridge structure, feels bloated. Why write a bridge when people will never make it that far? Some hits don't even have a chorus, they're just one hook, looped like an endless scroll. Spotify calls them front-loaded tracks. Translation: make it catchy, make it instant, and for God's sake, don't bore anyone. Playlists become the new albums. But these playlists aren't curated by tastemakers in dimly lit record shops. They're algorithmic mood machines: chill vibes, sad bops, beast mode. Music becomes functional. It's no longer about what the artist wants to say, it's about what fits your activity. Are you working out? Here's 120 BPM. Studying? Here's lo-fi beats that sound like wallpaper. Having a mental breakdown but still want to feel aesthetic? There's a playlist for that too. Streaming platforms know this. They've trained us to think in moods, not movements. Instead of albums, we consume snackable tracks, shuffled endlessly until they blur into background noise. It's music as ambience, music as wallpaper, music as a productivity tool. The irony? The album isn't dead because people stopped loving music. It's dying because the architecture of attention changed. TikTok rewired our brains for short bursts. Instagram taught us to scroll, not to linger. YouTube rewarded the quick dopamine hit. Now Spotify bows to the same gods, short, sticky, and constant. Even artists who still believe in albums face a brutal choice: make art for the feed or disappear. A 60-minute concept record is a noble gesture, but in the streaming trenches, every second is a battle for retention. You can pour your soul into track 8, the one that ties the narrative together, but if the listener never gets past track 2, the algorithm punishes you. Labels know this. A&R notes now sound like this: great song, but can we get to the chorus in 15 seconds? And here's the kicker: the collapse of the album isn't just an artistic tragedy, it's a psychological one. Albums used to anchor us. They were cultural markers. Where were you when you first heard Thriller? When did you discover OK Computer? Albums gave us eras, gave us identity. Now, our cultural memory is fragmented into memes and moments. We don't live inside albums anymore, we skim through infinite snippets of sound. But not everyone accepts this fate. Some artists fight back. They release visual albums, immersive experiences, vinyl-only projects, anything to slow the scroll and reclaim attention. Others lean into the chaos, embracing hyperfragmentation, tracks under 2 minutes, no intros, just hook after hook like a slot machine. And in this war for attention, one question emerges like feedback at the end of a forgotten song. If music becomes pure utility, background for content, fuel for virality, what happens to its soul? We used to gather around albums like campfires. Now, we swipe past songs like disposable sparks. The fire isn't gone. It's just harder to see in the glare of the algorithm. The spotlight has never been so bright or so cruel. For musicians today, virality is both the golden ticket and the guillotine. One video, one 15-second hook, and you can go from total obscurity to global fame overnight. It sounds like a dream. But like all dreams engineered by algorithms, it comes with a price. Let's start with the math of virality. A single viral TikTok can catapult an unknown track to the Billboard charts in a week. The label calls, the streams skyrocket, and suddenly you're the next big thing. But the algorithm that made you can unmake you just as fast. Your fame isn't built on loyalty, it's built on momentum, and momentum dies quickly. If you don't follow up with another hit fast, the feed moves on. This is where the pressure becomes unbearable. Labels and managers now treat artists like content factories, demanding constant output to feed the machine. You're not just writing songs, you're producing skits, choreographing dances, replying to comments, live streaming Q&As, cutting behind-the-scenes clips, and praying that at least one piece of content hits. The old album cycle, 2 years between records, is gone. Now, you're on a 24/7 conveyor belt. Miss a beat, and the algorithm forgets you. It's not just exhausting, it's soul-crushing. Studies on social media burnout show skyrocketing rates of depression and anxiety among creators. Musicians are no exception. They're not only competing for streams, they're competing for attention, and attention is brutal currency. Fans don't just want music, they want access, constant and unfiltered. You're expected to be funny, relatable, vulnerable, and marketable, all while making art. And here's the kicker: virality doesn't equal stability. A viral hit might get you 10 million streams, but if those streams come from passive listeners who heard you on a TikTok trend, they may never check out your other songs. You can be famous without being financially secure. The algorithm rewards novelty, not loyalty. You're as relevant as your last trend. For many artists, this treadmill leads to mental collapse. They describe a relentless fear of disappearing, of waking up one day and realizing the feed has moved on, the followers have unfollowed, the algorithm has decided your era is over. It's fame with an expiration date. Then there's the distortion of art itself. When your survival depends on virality, you start creating for the algorithm, not for expression. Hooks get shorter. Lyrics get mimified. Danceability trumps depth. Songs become templates for trends. Authenticity becomes a marketing strategy. And when you finally burn out, because everyone does, you leave behind not an album, not a legacy, but a handful of viral clips buried in the digital landfill. The mental health crisis in the music industry isn't new, but the algorithmic economy has poured gasoline on the fire. Therapy isn't enough when the system itself runs on insecurity. The culture rewards obsession, punishes stillness, and celebrates the hustle until the hustle breaks you. And yet, artists keep running toward the flame. Because what's the alternative? In a world where visibility is survival, opting out feels like self-erasure. You either play the game or vanish. But here's a question we need to ask. If the cost of virality is your mental health, your art, and your sense of self, is it still worth the hit? This is the dark side no one wants to scroll past. The price of the algorithm's love is everything you are. Once upon a time, discovering talent was an art form. A grizzled A&R executive would haunt tiny clubs, scanning for a spark of genius in the smoke and noise. They trusted their ears, their instincts, their gut. They could see past the rough edges and predict the next star. But those days are over. Today, the new A&R executive isn't a person, it's an algorithm. Spotify, TikTok, YouTube, and even Instagram have become the primary talent scouts of the music industry. Forget smoky clubs, artists are now discovered in the chaos of digital feeds, where engagement metrics speak louder than melody. The modern A&R doesn't ask, "Does this song move me?" It asks, "Does this song move the numbers?" And the numbers are everything. The labels know it. They don't sign unknowns anymore, they sign data. Streams, saves, playlist placements, follower counts, TikTok trend performance, these are the new measures of worth. If your track explodes on TikTok, expect DMs from labels before the trend even peaks. They won't ask to hear the rest of your music. They won't care if you've been honing your craft for a decade. They just want to know one thing: can you repeat this? The algorithm is ruthless because it doesn't understand art, it understands patterns. It hunts for repeatable formulas, tempos that keep people engaged, chord progressions that feel familiar but not too familiar, lyrical hooks that can be clipped into 15-second bursts. It doesn't care about originality, it cares about optimization. If the machine detects that people skip after 15 seconds, songs shrink. If it notices that upbeat tracks go viral faster, moody ballads die in the drafts. Here's the unsettling truth: in many ways, the future of taste no longer belongs to culture, it belongs to code. Recommendation engines decide what you hear before you even know what you want. Your Discover Weekly playlist? Curated by an algorithm that knows your habits better than your best friend. TikTok's For You page? A behavioral loop designed to keep you scrolling, serving you songs it predicts will keep you hooked. The more the system learns, the less room there is for serendipity. The consequences ripple through creativity. Artists now reverse engineer their songs for virality, catchy intros to avoid early skips, beats that work with TikTok dances, lyrics that can double as captions. Music isn't just for listening anymore, it's for performing in fragments. Even the structure of songs is mutating under algorithmic pressure. The traditional 3-minute track with a slow build? Too risky. People don't wait for the hook, they want it immediately. And labels? They've adapted with surgical precision. Instead of gambling on artist development, they cherry-pick the ones already buzzing online. In fact, some labels have set up data farms, scraping social platforms for rising engagement curves. The signings feel less like artistic partnerships and more like acquisitions, buying into an existing trend before it burns out. This shift creates a chilling paradox. The algorithm has democratized music by letting anyone go viral, but it has also made creativity feel homogenized. When success depends on pleasing the machine, music risks becoming a loop of self-replicating sounds. Everyone chasing the same formula. Everyone sounding the same. And yet, the scariest part? The algorithm is only getting smarter. Soon, with advances in AI music generation, it won't just recommend hits, it will create them. Imagine a world where Spotify doesn't just curate your playlist, it produces personalized tracks tailored to your biometric feedback, mood, and listening history. Why hire a human when an AI can compose a guaranteed hit for pennies? If this sounds dystopian, that's because it is. When taste becomes a math problem, what happens to the soul of music? In the end, the question isn't whether the algorithm will dominate the industry. It already does. The real question is, are we ready for a future where art serves data and not the other way around? Walk into any streaming chart today and you'll notice something strange. Everything sounds familiar. Different artists, different voices, but the same mood, the same chord progressions, the same vocal tone, even the same beat drops time to the second. If you feel like every song is blending into one giant sonic smoothie, you're not imagining it. Originality is collapsing, and it's not an accident. Why does everything sound the same? Because the system rewards sameness. The algorithm doesn't care about innovation, it cares about predictability. A song that sounds too different risks people skipping. A skip is death in the age of streaming because it signals to the machine, don't recommend this track. The algorithm thrives on patterns, and so does the industry. This is why nearly every chart-topping pop hit of the last 5 years hovers around 120 to 140 beats per minute. It's why you hear those soft, breathy vocal tones with heavy reverb on half the tracks you stream. It's why the intro rarely lasts more than 5 seconds. It's why pre-choruses and choruses sound eerily similar across artists you'd swear were unique. Producers know this. They study Spotify's data sets. They know what works because the machine tells them. And so, creativity becomes optimization, trimming anything too weird, sanding down the edges, molding the song into something the algorithm will love. If that means copying the sound of the last big hit, so be it. And this isn't just a pop phenomenon. Hip-hop, once the boldest genre in terms of sonic experimentation, now leans into the same trap-heavy beats and repetitive hi-hats because those are the tracks that thrive on TikTok. Country music? Most of it sounds like a warmed-over remix of the last decade of Nashville hits, sprinkled with a few token modern beats to keep it playlist-friendly. Even indie music, the supposed bastion of originality, has succumbed. Indie pop today often sounds like a polished algorithmic echo of bedroom pop aesthetics designed to be lo-fi but still safe. This raises a chilling question: is the music industry killing originality, or are we, the listeners, the problem? Because let's face it, we click what feels familiar. We replay what sounds like the last thing we loved. The platforms track our behavior, learn our habits, and feed us more of the same. Over time, our preferences tighten into a narrow loop. We think we're choosing, but we're being chosen for. And here's the kicker: This is intentional. Familiarity equals comfort. Comfort equals retention. Retention equals money. Streaming platforms want you to stay in the zone, never skipping, never leaving, so they fine-tune the experience to keep you hooked. If that means the collapse of originality, so be it. But there's another layer. Short-form content is reshaping the DNA of music. TikTok didn't just influence hits, it rewired them. Songs now compete for the first 10 seconds because that's all they get in a TikTok clip. Choruses appear almost immediately. Bridges? Rare. Complex instrumentals? Forget it. Every second must fight for survival because if a listener scrolls, the song dies. In this environment, who would risk something truly experimental? The result is an endless echo chamber. Hits sound like other hits, which sound like other hits. It's musical inbreeding. The gene pool of sound narrows until every track starts to feel like déjà vu. The wild, unpredictable moments, the kind that make you stop in your tracks and say, "What is this?" are nearly extinct. And yet, here's the dark irony. For many, this homogenization feels good. Our brains love patterns. Repetition is addictive. Familiar chord progressions and predictable drops trigger dopamine because they feel safe. The industry knows this, and the algorithm weaponizes it. You're not bored, you're hooked. That's the point. So, originality doesn't vanish with a bang, it dissolves quietly under the weight of optimization. We might never even notice, because the new normal feels right. Safe. Comfortable. But what happens when all music sounds the same? When every playlist is a blur of slightly different versions of the same track? Does music still move us? Or does it just fill the silence? We've reached the final stretch of this story, and it's no longer just about streaming platforms, labels, or algorithms. It's about the collision between human creativity and artificial intelligence. The stakes? Nothing less than the soul of music. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth: AI is already making music. And not just generic elevator loops, full tracks, in every genre, tuned to perfection, optimized for streaming, and eerily capable of imitating your favorite artist's voice. Want a brand new Drake track every morning? Done. Want Taylor Swift lyrics but in Billie Eilish's tone over a lo-fi hip-hop beat? There's an AI for that. For labels, this isn't a threat, it's a dream. No tour schedules. No drama. No lawsuits over masters. An infinite supply of music that sounds like everything you love, generated instantly and at almost zero cost. AI can spit out hundreds of songs before lunch. Some already outperform human-made tracks in background playlists, the kind of music that gets billions of streams simply because people need sound while studying, working, or sleeping. But AI doesn't just replicate, it optimizes. It knows the exact chord progressions most likely to keep you listening. It knows the tempo sweet spot for focused playlists. It knows which emotional tone works for Monday mornings versus Friday nights. AI doesn't just make music, it makes music that wins the algorithmic game every time. So, where does that leave human artists? Here's the paradox: artificial intelligence is simultaneously destroying and democratizing music. Yes, it can flood the market with synthetic songs, but it also puts powerful tools in the hands of creators. A kid in their bedroom can now compose a symphony, produce a club banger, or recreate the sound of a 1970s soul record without an expensive studio or a label. The gatekeepers are losing their grip. And yet, there's a dark side. If anyone can sound like anyone, what does authenticity even mean? If you can't tell whether the song you love was written by a heartbroken teenager in their bedroom or generated by a neural network, does it matter? Or does the illusion become the reality? There's another question, a bigger one. Will we still crave human imperfection in a world of machine-made perfection? Because music isn't just notes and rhythms, it's flaws, cracks in the voice, unexpected choices that make us feel something real. AI can simulate that, sure, but does simulation ever truly replace the messy, unrepeatable beauty of a human soul trying to express itself? Here's the twist. The future might not be a war between humans and machines, but a collaboration. Artists who survive and thrive will be those who learn to use AI as an instrument, not an enemy. Imagine albums where a human writes the core idea, but AI fills the sonic universe around it. Imagine live performances where artists improvise over AI-generated soundscapes in real time. Imagine fans co-creating music with their favorite stars, remixing and personalizing tracks with AI tools. But let's not sugarcoat it, there will be casualties. The middle tier, the session writers, the background music producers, the anonymous playlist fillers, may vanish. The economy of good enough music will be dominated by AI, because AI does good enough perfectly. So, what's the endgame? It might come down to this: music will split in two. On one side, algorithmic soundscapes, optimized, infinite, and soulless, feeding the background noise economy. On the other, human artistry, rarer and more valuable than ever, because its imperfections and unpredictability can't be fully replicated. The question is, which side will you listen to? And maybe the bigger question is this: will music in the future still belong to us, or to the machine? We began this journey with the promise that streaming would democratize music, giving everyone a voice. But somewhere along the line, we handed that voice to algorithms. Now, with AI stepping in, the final chorus is playing, and nobody knows who's writing the lyrics anymore. So, the next time your favorite playlist shuffles to a track you love, ask yourself, who made this? A person? A program? And does it even matter? Because in the end, the future of music isn't just about sound, it's about what we believe music is. A product? A feeling? A connection? Or something machines will own while we just listen? The lights are fading. The speakers hum. And somewhere, in the quiet before the next track begins, a question lingers. When music no longer needs us, will we still need music?